to be one of the hardest jobs in government, to be an impartial watchdog and hold government agencies as important as the Department of Justice and FBI accountable. And I just want you to know how much we appreciate your work and your team's work. Likewise, I think it's important, even though we're critical of the leadership of the FBI during the last administration and the way they mishandled this counterintelligence investigation, I think the rank-and-file agents in the FBI and their colleagues in the intelligence community need to know that we are there for them and support them in the faithful discharge of their responsibilities. I happen to have the privilege of serving on the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee, and I like to think that there is no more ardent supporter of our law enforcement agencies or our intelligence community than I am. And I believe that General Hayden, when he wrote his book about his experience at the CIA, had it right. It was called Playing to the Edge. Playing to the edge of your authorities, not over the line, but up to the edge in the interest of our national security. But I think that also makes it important for us to root out illegality, mendacity, deception in the exercise of the authorities that are given to our intelligence community. And so let me ask you a little bit about that. Because I can't think of anything more damaging to the intelligence community, the FBI and the DOJ, than what you have uncovered in this 400-page report and what we've seen here. It really is very troubling. Can I ask you, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, as you have pointed out, considers the application of a foreign intelligence surveillance for a warrant by the FBI, working with the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. Do you believe if the court knew what you know now, that it would have ever issued the FISA warrant in the first place?
You know, we're careful not to predict what federal judges would do, presented with the evidence and whether there would be sufficient basis to find probable cause. I know that they would not sign a warrant if they were told not all relevant information was included in it.
Or if they were lied to.
And certainly if they were lied to.
And do you know whether the court is currently considering this matter?
Well, I know the court, based on discussions with folks at NSD, at the National Security Division, that they have the report and that they have a follow-on letter from the department about this matter.
Well, I hope they will not let this pass, because if this misbehavior, this illegality, this deception becomes a routine, I agree with Senator Graham that it will be the end of the authorities that Congress has granted under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which I think would be very damaging to our national security. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act includes the word surveillance, obviously, and you can't surveil an American citizen for intelligence purposes except under very specialized and exacting circumstances. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
Because the rights given to an American citizen under the U.S. Constitution are laid out in the Bill of Rights, among other places, and there is a higher standard with regard to getting a warrant, let's say, to wiretap or to investigate an American citizen than there would be a foreign agent, correct?
That's correct. There's particularly sensitive circumstances around surveilling a U.S. person.
So the whole exception here, which authorized the court, by which the court authorized the surveillance of Mr. Page, was based on some proof or some indication, some suspicion he was an agent of a foreign power, correct?
Correct. They had to show probable cause to believe he was an agent of a foreign power.
But as you pointed out, they got incomplete and misleading information in that process. Agreed?
The court got inaccurate, incomplete information. Agreed.
So what's the difference between surveillance and spying?
Well, surveillance, and the term I'm going to use and we use in the report, is what's in the law, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
You don't like the vernacular?
I'm going to stick to what we do as IGs, which is look at the law and stick to what the language is in the law.
Well, to my mind, there's really no difference. although it's legally authorized according to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, it's an active covert intelligence gathering against here a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power. Let me ask you about the defensive briefing. And you've explained in response to Senator Graham's questions the difference between a counterintelligence investigation and a criminal investigation. And I believe at some point during the last few years, I remember Loretta Lynch, the former Attorney General, say that defensive briefings were routine in counterintelligence investigations. Would you agree with that?
You know, I frankly don't have enough experience with them on the national security side to tell you one way or the other.
You don't have
I've
any,
heard that be said, but I don't know specifically.
you don't have any reason to disagree with?
No reason to disagree.
Okay. So if they are routine, if Attorney General Lynch is correct, the decision by Mr. Priestap, the head of the counterintelligence division of the FBI, not to provide an extensive counterintelligence briefing, defensive briefing to candidate Trump and his campaign would be unusual.
If it's usual, then not doing it, yes, I agree, would be unusual.
What was even more unusual is the fact that when the Director of National Intelligence went to provide what turned out to be a perfunctory briefing to the Trump campaign, lasted about 13 minutes, I think you indicated, Kate. Is that correct?
That's correct. The agent, there was one FBI agent there, and they chose the agent from the counterintelligence investigation.
So instead of their mission being to provide candidate Trump and his campaign, to arm them with information so that they could prevent the Russians from infiltrating their campaign, this briefing, such as it was, had a dual purpose. The agent, it says on page 342 of your report, actually prepared himself going through mock briefings headed by Stroke, Lisa Page, the Intel Section Chief, and possibly the General Counsel Unit Chief, correct?
That's correct.
So this was not just an incidental sort of thing. Obviously, there were plans made for the agent to go in as part of this defensive briefing and perhaps get General Flynn to inadvertently offer information that might be helpful to the FBI in their investigation.
Yeah, and as explained to us, it was dual purpose. One, to see if anything was said during the briefing in response to the briefing that would be useful for Crossfire Hurricane purposes immediately, but also, as the agents told us, for purposes of a future interview of Mr. Flynn, which did in fact occur later.
And so Mr. Flynn was clearly the target.
He was certainly, of the three people there from the Trump campaign, the only one of the three who was a subject of an FBI investigation at the time.
And he wasn't told that he was under investigation or that the agent was there hoping to bait him into providing incriminatory information, and the agent didn't provide him any declaration or admonishment of his Miranda rights, correct?
He certainly wasn't told there was a dual purpose to the briefing.
Well, it looks to me like Director Wray was so concerned about this that he's, as you pointed out, said that this will never happen again.
That's right.
Is that what you said?
That's
Okay, so how is that not spying on the Trump campaign? I mean, you could certainly see that agent as a confidential source in the sense that Flynn didn't know, Trump didn't know that they were being interviewed and recorded, or at least memorialized after the meeting. I don't know, I think that's a fairly interesting question to ask. King James says, Donald Trump, the top recognized name in all of America in 2015, a billionaire, a developer, 40 years, a TV star as well, kind of special guy, but the intelligence agencies ordered by Obama targeted him. Yep, sums it up perfectly.
That's correct.
So let me ask you, Mr. Horowitz, are you familiar with the fact that Director Comey had a meeting with President Trump in January of 2017 to talk to him about the Steele dossier?
I am, and we actually referenced that in our report about his preparation and handling of the memos that came out of that meeting.
Why should we believe that Director Comey's so-called defensive briefing, if you want to call it that, of the president in January 2017 was anything more than an attempt to try to bait the president into providing incriminatory information which would be useful to the FBI in its counterintelligence investigation or potentially some future criminal investigation?
I have no information one way or the other to make a judgment on that, but as mentioned earlier, one of the concerns with doing that here is that it leaves open the possibility that people might ask, did it happen elsewhere?
Well, it strikes me as fraught with danger, just like it was for General Flynn, for the director to go into the White House, the Oval Office in the White House, not to tell the president that anything he says could be used against him in an ongoing investigation, potentially including criminal charges. And the final thing I would say is I agree with the chairman. If this is going to happen to a presidential candidate or the president of the United States, what kind of protection do average American citizens have that their government won't array this vast power against them and essentially ruin their lives? To me, that's a profound concern as a result of your investigation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And picking up on that editorial comment, I've been joining Senator Leahy and Senator Lee
God, not
for
Durbin.
years talking about this FISA.
Oh,
program.
God.
And we now have an ample record here in this case and in a lot of others. 2002, the FISA court identified more than 75 cases in which it was misled by the FBI.
We talked about that
Internal
yesterday.
FBI review in 2006, dozens of inaccuracies provided to the FISA court. The list goes on and on. So let's have a fulsome conversation after this about the future of the FISA court and the representations that are made to it. Let me try, if I can, Mr. Horowitz, thank you and your team for being here, to go through a few points. The chairman gave an uncharacteristic, flowery, heated opening that went on.
Screw you. Screw you, Durbin. You're the one who lied about the whole S-hole country thing. Nobody cares about your characterizations.
Some 40 minutes. And
again, so what? He said he'd go over, and he gave Feinstein as much time as she wanted. God, you're a petty little man.
produced a lengthy record of emails from Lisa Page and Peter
Text
Strzok,
messages.
which repeatedly demonstrated statements of hostility toward candidate Donald Trump. He went on to say these were the people in charge. When I read
Also
your
President Donald
summary
Trump.
of your findings, you didn't find either of them to be in charge, did you?
On this investigation, we did not.
Okay.
He's showing a pattern of FBI bias against Trump and his people that would lend credence to all of the lies and omissions and changes made to documents, a change made to document, I shouldn't use a plural, that the FBI performed in this entire debacle. It is called painting a picture.
When it comes to expletives, you also, on page 339 of your report, found some agents at the FBI who had an exactly opposite political viewpoint. And were very positive toward candidate Trump and very open in their use of expletives to demonstrate that.
And did they have a chance to influence any investigations against, say, Hillary? No.
And those individuals, to be clear, were not part of the Crossfire Hurricane team, but were in a different field office interacting with the Crossfire Hurricane team.
And I
So, fuck you, Durbin.
hope we can all concede the point. We don't believe anyone in this capacity, this delicate capacity with life-changing decision-making every single day should be so politically biased as to call into question their values and their character.
That's what
That's
Horowitz
correct,
said
and I
last
made
year.
this point last year when this issue
you.
came up. Individuals at the Justice Department and the FBI are allowed to have their political views. They're allowed to be voters. They're allowed to be engaged citizens. They should be. They can't, though, tie their personal views to their investigative acts.
And I'm sure that's one of the things you've shared with Director Wray.
Correct.
All right. Also, the chairman made a point early on of talking about the fact that the Trump campaign was not notified of this ongoing investigation until a much later date, after it had been initiated. And I would just say, be careful what you wish for.
The Trump campaign was never notified until Comey blurted it out during a congressional hearing. Until then, they didn't know. In fact, Trump wasn't told about it at all until Comey went to him in January of 2017 and said, "We're looking at some of your people." So I guess I got my timeline mixed up. Excuse me. Trump did know, but he didn't know that he was part of the investigation.
Because there are those of us who look at the James Comey October 28th public declaration about the Hillary Clinton investigation.
Comey's an
As
idiot.
being deadly in terms of the outcome of this election.
And thank
So this
God.
notion of the FBI publicizing investigations, making them known to many people, can cut both ways. It's good to know, I'm sure, but you run the risk that as more people come to know it, it becomes public knowledge. Is that an issue?
Yeah, look, we wrote the last year's report about that concern of what Director Comey did in that regard, and you obviously want to control information and make sure only the people who actually need to know it.
So the point I'm trying to get to is the chairman's opening suggested a bias, at least in this instance, that the FBI and others, against Donald Trump that he believes was manifest in many of the things that followed. I could argue from our side of the table, we can find bias that includes Comey's statements, public statements, right before the election that really had, in many of our points of view, determinative outcome. Let me go back to the irrepressible, ever-present Rudolph Giuliani.
This goes to show me
Because
Comey doesn't know how to
here's
run the
something-
FBI.
During the 2016 campaign, Rudy Giuliani, who was then a Trump campaign surrogate, bragged about having access to information about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. He teased in October 2016 that a surprise was coming. And on November 4th, after Director Comey sent his letter reopening the investigation, Giuliani said, and I quote, "I had expected this. Did I hear about it? You're darn right I heard about it," the mayor said. So how can we be dealing with those kinds of statements that long ago and still not have some resolution as to whether or not he was just bluffing or, in fact, he had moles in that New York office? If I remember right, one of Comey's rationales for his public announcement was, I couldn't do it through the New York office because it leaks like a sieve. Is there no investigation, or has there been no investigation of this?
He said there was.
So, as I mentioned last year when we released our report on the Clinton email investigation, we are looking at still that question. And the challenge of that investigation, as I mentioned back then, I'll mention again, is proving who spoke to whom and when based on records at the FBI, and understanding that there's rarely going to be substantive information we will get, for example, from toll records or others, but we will find out context, and we're trying to follow up. We're continuing to do that. We've issued 2 reports so far about findings we had of leaks and misconduct, and we have investigations ongoing.
And little Dick, if you've been
Giuliani
listening,
now
you'd know
professes
that.
to be President Trump's lawyer, and occasionally the president acknowledges that. Sometimes he doesn't. Are there any concerns that
Christ.
Mr. Giuliani may be continuing to improperly obtain information from sources in law enforcement not authorized to provide it?
I'm not going to speak to what we've learned or what we know about what our ongoing investigations, and I'm not investigating matters related to the ongoing Ukraine issues that I think you're referencing.
Backfill, whitewash, rehabilitate. Durbin is backfilling as much as he can with all of this irrelevant crap in order to keep from addressing as, oh, I can't remember who said it now. It might have been Leahy, the elephants in the room. Although Leahy was talking about something specifically not having to do with the FISA investigation.
Let me ask, if I can, on this question of the problems within this case, particularly as they relate to
Right,
the
that
treatment
exactly, King James.
of individuals who were engaged in it. And I'm thinking particularly of the ongoing questions about whether or not one particular individual was treated fairly here. Is it your conclusion that he was not Mr. Page was not a Russian agent? Or I should say, did not have important contacts that were not in the best interests of the United States with the Russian leadership?
Oh, my God.
I'm not in a position to assess that. What I can assess is looking at the evidence that the FBI put forward to the FISA court. A significant number of pieces of that evidence do not support their theory of the case. And that was never told to Justice Department lawyers, who are the ones who are the gatekeepers and have to be able to know that information to make that decision.
And Carter Page was never charged with anything.
They're the experts, not me.
Could we speak for a moment to the Steele dossier, Steele
Yes.
file in this case? I believe you had a pretty definitive statement about what impact that Steele file had on the initiation of this investigation. What was your conclusion?
In terms of the initiation of the investigation, it had no impact.
No impact.
No impact. It was not known to the team that opened the investigation at the time they opened it.
Yeah, I'm sure the CIA and Brennan didn't talk to them about it at all, although they may not have said, we've got this stuff from this British guy, because a lot of it, as many people have speculated, was written by Glenn Simpson and Nellie Orr, and that Steele was merely a beard. But it's entirely possible that the CIA told the FBI, hey, we've got this going on with this guy. You need to get an investigation going and start gearing up for a FISA on him so you can spy on him, because we can't.
So you've concluded in several different ways that there's no evidence of political influence for the opening of this
Doesn't
crossfire
matter.
hurricane investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Let's see if there's anything else here. On this FISA reform issue, I can get back to that later, but one thing that's interesting here, and Senator Lee is not with us at this moment, he's introduced a bill which I'm co-sponsoring, which would give the Inspector General's office, in this circumstance, the authority to investigate attorneys.
Correct.
In the department. Right now, that's not allowed under the law, is it?
That's correct, it is not. And thank you for co-sponsoring the bill, as have several other members of the committee.
It seems to me to be obvious. Do you know what the theory is behind their being separate and not subject to this investigation?
This
They're
is a
lawyers.
legacy of history. Back in 1988, when the IG was created at Justice, the compromise was that attorneys would be carved out. By the way, so was the FBI and DEA at the time, and that we would have jurisdiction over everybody else. After the Aldrich Ames spy scandal, Attorney General Ashcroft actually changed that and gave us the authority over DEA and FBI. Congress codified it in 2002, but attorneys, still a carve-out. We're the only IG that can't review conduct of all the employees in our organization, including
Wow.
attorneys.
I didn't know that.
Attorney General Ashcroft was authorized to give you that kind of option?
Under the statute as it then existed,
As it existed.
he had the authority to do that. The statutory change took that away.
Mr. Chairman, I hope you'll consider that when we're putting together an agenda. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
service.
Thank you, and we'll go to.
Damn, that was actually a worthwhile question from a
30 seconds
Democrat.
here. Has anybody been charged with working with the Russians, illegally working with the Russians that were part of the Trump campaign that you know of?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mike
I find the conclusion that some have raised that your report, Mr. Horowitz, somehow exonerates the FBI in this matter to be crazy. Absolutely crazy. To the point that it almost makes me wonder whether those who are making this argument have read the same report that we're talking about today. Perhaps they're talking about a different report. There is no planet on which I think this report indicates that things were okay within the FBI in connection with this investigation. They most certainly were not. And yet, stunningly, former FBI Director Jim Comey took to the pages of the Washington Post to declare that this report, your report, shows that, quote, the FBI fulfilled its mission protecting the American people and upholding the U.S. Constitution. I don't understand that. I find it absolutely stunning that he would reach that conclusion. This is nonsense. I don't care where you fit on the political spectrum. If you are a politician or if you are a non-politician, if you are a liberal or a conservative, a Republican, a Democrat, regardless of your age, your views, you should be deeply concerned about what's in your report, Mr. Horowitz.
Your eyeglasses prescription.
This report is a scathing indictment of the FBI, of the agents that were involved, and I want to be clear about that because the FBI is an institution that has a long history of respect in this country. And as a federal prosecutor, I worked with the FBI. I found many of its agents to be people of utmost integrity and thoroughness. And that's part of why I'm so concerned by your report and its findings, the facts stated therein, because I think this really damages that. There is a lot of good in this country that comes not just from the FBI being good, but also being understood to be good. The behavior outlined in your report is, at a minimum, so negligent. I actually would say so reckless that it calls into question the legitimacy of the entire FISA program. And I don't say that lightly. I say this, of course, as someone who has long questioned the FISA program and how it could be abused, but this really pushes us over the edge. I'll get back to that in a minute. The report concludes, way too generously in my view, that the report, quote, did not find documentary or testimonial evidence of intentional misconduct on the part of the case agents who were involved in investigating the Trump campaign. But the report goes on to call the conduct of the agents and the supervisors involved to be, quote, serious performance failures, which you noted were failures for which you did not receive a satisfactory explanation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Serious performance failures. Failures without any type of satisfactory explanation. This is the failure that Jim Comey astoundingly, stunningly, irresponsibly considers a fulfilled mission? A mission that includes, among other things, protecting the constitutional rights of the American people? I think not.
Nicely done.
This is what the former head of the FBI considers protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. I just can't understand it. It's simply not good enough. It may be good enough for Mr. Comey. It's not good enough for the American people. Every American really should be terrified by this report. The FBI team that investigated the Trump campaign was, as has been pointed out, handpicked. After all, it couldn't and wouldn't and wasn't the case that they would just pick any ordinary investigators to investigate a presidential campaign, especially the presidential campaign of one of the two major party nominees, for what was acknowledged in the report to have been one of the most sensitive FBI investigations. These agents were supposed to have been the best of the best.
Okay, there we go. All right. I backed up where Mike Lee was talking while we were hung up. So let me go back to that. I'm fairly certain I got pretty much back to where he was. I may have to play around with it a bit. But, man, the connection is not good today. There we go. It's coming back. Let me wait just a second for the frames to catch up. I gotta expand this. Okay, that's better. All right. All right, let's see what we can get here.
that your report, Mr. Horowitz, somehow exonerates the FBI in this matter to be crazy. Absolutely crazy. To the point that it almost makes me wonder whether those who are making this argument have read the same report that we're talking about today. Perhaps they're talking about a different report. There is no planet on which I think this report indicates that things were okay within the FBI in connection with this investigation. They most certainly were not. And yet, stunningly, former FBI Director Jim Comey took to the pages of the Washington Post to declare that this report, your report, shows that, quote, the FBI fulfilled its mission protecting the American people and upholding the U.S. Constitution. I don't understand that. I find it absolutely stunning that he would reach that conclusion. This is nonsense. I don't care where you fit on the political spectrum. If you are a politician or if you are a non-politician, if you are a liberal or a conservative, a Republican, a Democrat, regardless of your age, your views, you should be deeply concerned about what's in your report, Mr. Horowitz. This report is a scathing indictment of the FBI, of the agents that were involved, and I want to be clear about that because the FBI is an institution that has a long history of respect in this country. And as a federal prosecutor, I worked with the FBI. I've found many of its agents to be people of utmost integrity and thoroughness. And that's part of why I'm so concerned by your report and its findings, the facts stated therein. It's because I think this really damages that. There is a lot of good in this country that comes not just from the FBI being good, but also being understood to be good. The behavior outlined in your report is, at a minimum, so negligent. I actually would say so reckless that it calls into question the legitimacy of the entire FISA program. And I don't say that lightly. I say this, of course, as someone who has long questioned the FISA program and how it could be abused, but this really pushes us over the edge. I'll get back to that in a minute. The report concludes, way too generously in my view, that the report, quote, did not find documentary or testimonial evidence of intentional misconduct on the part of the case agents who were involved in investigating the Trump campaign. But the report goes on to call the conduct of the agents and the supervisors involved to be, quote, serious performance failures, which you noted were failures for which you did not receive a satisfactory explanation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Serious performance failures. Failures without any type of satisfactory explanation. This is the failure that Jim Comey astoundingly, stunningly, irresponsibly considers a fulfilled mission, a mission that includes, among other things, protecting the constitutional rights of the American people? I think not. This is what the former head of the FBI considers protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. I just can't understand it. It's simply not good enough. It may be good enough for Mr. Comey. It's not good enough for the American people. Every American really should be terrified by this report. The FBI team that investigated the Trump campaign was, as has been pointed out, handpicked. After all, it couldn't and wouldn't and wasn't the case that they would just pick any ordinary investigators to investigate a presidential campaign, especially the presidential campaign of one of the two major party nominees, for what was acknowledged in the report to have been one of the most sensitive FBI investigations. These agents were supposed to have been the best of the best, and we wouldn't expect anything less in that circumstance. They were supposed to be of the highest character and professionalism, committed to protecting the civil liberties of all Americans. You see, our privacy is not at odds with our security. our privacy is inextricably intertwined with, and indeed an inseparable part of our security. We cannot be secure unless our privacy is also guaranteed. We certainly can't be secure in our Republican form of government if, after all, our Republican form of government is imperiled by people who choose to politicize the intelligence gathering and law enforcement apparatus that our federal government has. So we're faced with two possibilities. Either one, these FBI agents purposely used the power of the federal government to wage a political war against a presidential candidate they despised, or two, these agents were so incompetent that they allowed a paid foreign political operative to weaponize the FISA program into a spying operation on a rival presidential political campaign. I'm not sure about you, but I'm not sure which one is worse. I am sure that neither conclusion is acceptable. They're both horrifying for slightly different reasons. I'm not sure there is a substantive distinction between the two of them. I'm not sure one can conclude, I'm not sure it's possible to conclude that the bias evident in communications between some of these investigators wasn't at least a part of it. Now, the fact that you say that there wasn't a causal connection between them, that there wasn't a sine qua non with but-for causal chain between those communications and the opening of the investigation itself is beside the point. The fact is, these were agents who made their bias clear, and they went after someone in part because they did not like his candidacy, and that's inexcusable. The report in the FBI's abuse, I believe it's longstanding abuse, I believe it's inevitable abuse of FISA and the FISA court to surveil American citizens, should, in a sense, not be of tremendous surprise to us. James Madison warned us against this very kind of thing in Federalist 51 when he said if men were angels, they wouldn't need a government. If we had access to angels to govern us, we wouldn't need rules about government. But alas, we are not angels. We don't have access to angels to govern us. And so we have to have auxiliary precautions. We have to have checks and balances to make sure that no one person or no one entity gets too much power. And added to those checks and balances, we also have substantive limitations, like the Fourth Amendment. We have things that are there to protect us. I've believed for some time, as has been noted earlier in this hearing, and I've teamed up with people at the opposite end of the political ideological spectrum, that FISA carries with it an unacceptable risk of abuse. That's why I've teamed up with Senator Pat Leahy over the last 9 years that I've served in the Senate and on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because I believe these programs are subject to abuse. I've been warning for years that inevitably these would result in abuse. It's not a question of if, but it's when and how soon will government officials get caught doing it. It actually surprises me in some ways that it took us this long to find an instance where you get caught. But then again, that is what happens. When you take a standard that is malleable, that requires virtually no public accountability, you render all but a small handful of Intelligence Committee lawmakers in the House and in the Senate, you render all other citizens other than them, and other than the intel community itself, ineligible to review their work. And then you make it possible for them to gather information. This kind of thing is, of course, going to happen. It's never not going to happen. And that scares me to death. Now, Inspector General Horowitz, you've stated several times today, both in your opening statement and in response to questions, that you did not find documentary testimonial evidence of bias that influenced the FBI's decision to conduct these operations. But Mr. Horowitz, is not the lack of evidence that you're talking about itself evidence of bias? Isn't the lack of evidence on bias evidence that we really should take as bias? But it's, in any event, it's certainly not itself indicative that no bias occurred. Isn't that correct?
Oh. I don't follow.
As to the opening, which is in a different place than the FISA issues that you've identified and I talked about earlier, I think it's two very different situations. On the FISA side, we found, as you noted, a lack of documentary testimony evidence about intentionality, but we also noted the lack of satisfactory explanations and, in fact, leave open the possibility that, for the reasons you indicated, it's unclear what the motivations were. On the one hand, gross incompetence, negligence. On the other hand, intentionality, and where in between. We weren't in a position to, with the evidence we had, to make that conclusion.
My point
I'm
is,
not ruling it out.
your lack of evidence here is not evidence that there was no bias.
I'm solely basing it, correct, on the actual evidence that we have.
Thank you very much.
Ow.
But, Mr. Horowitz, you actually did make a finding on that very question, did you not? I direct you to page 14 of the executive summary, where you ascribe this to management and supervisory failures that were not specific to this case, but that were potentially endemic. Is that not correct?
I'm sorry,
You
on the
say-
FISA side?
Yep, you say that so many basic and fundamental errors
Yes.
were made by 3 separate handpicked teams on one of the
Correct.
most sensitive FBI investigations raises significant questions regarding the FBI chain of command's management and supervision of the FISA
Correct.
process. You then go on to describe it as a failure of managers and supervisors.
Right.
And you go on to say that your remedy is an OIG audit, not only of this case, but of other cases that have nothing to
Correct.
do with the Trump campaign, nothing to
Correct.
do with politics. So you actually do make a finding about this, and that is that you attribute the failure here to a failure of management and supervision that could well go beyond this particular case.
Correct, although not just managers and supervisors, obviously. All the line people who had responsibility,
They
the
made errors,
prosecutors,
too.
they made very serious errors.
But you make no finding that this was attributable to a deep state conspiracy or a political conspiracy or any such type of motivation.
We make no finding. We explain in there that we did not have documentary or testimonial evidence that it was intentional. We also point out the lack of satisfactory explanations. And from there, I can't draw any further conclusions.
Correct.
That was a great answer. He did not let the guy get away with his narrative. Again, Horowitz pointed out, I didn't have factual or testimonial data, if you will, facts to back that up. So I couldn't make a conclusion in that regard. But that again, he said the responses were not satisfactory, which means he was probably being lied to up and down, because again, these people have had forever to get their story straight. Or they could just say, I really don't remember at that time, Mike. I couldn't say. So I really appreciate Horowitz's pushing back on that, because again, the Democrats are just trying to whitewash the whole thing by saying, since there was no political bias, it's all okay. And he also tried to make it sound like it was just the management that was screwing up. And Horowitz again pointed out, no, it was line people too. It was basically rotten from the head to the toe.
Other than you do, what you go with is that there was a failure of management and supervision over this complicated process that needs to be repaired.
From top to bottom.
Correct. Now, when did the what's the timeline on the Attorney General getting notice of this report? How long did it take between when he first saw this and when he credited this? He said that your investigation is a credit to the Department of Justice.
Well, we first provided the draft report for classification marking purposes right at the beginning of September, end of August, beginning of September.
So he and his team have had it for over a month, well over a month.
Yeah, and then we got it back
Exactly,
from them
Laura.
with the markings. We did this normal process in a classified review. We then incorporated the
director-
markings, then produced it back in November for the factual
The
accuracy.
director of the FBI would have
Same
had
thing.
access to it during that timeframe as
Same
well.
exact timeframe.
Same exact timeframe. And he complimented you on its thoroughness and professionalism and says that he accepts the report's findings, correct?
Correct.
With plenty of time to review it.
Correct.
Now, Then we get to Mr. Durham.
Here we go,
Did Mr.
nothing
Durham
to
have
do with
access
it.
to this report during that same period of time?
No, we did not give it to him in the end of August and September, precisely because it was for classification purposes. He had no reason to see it.
Yep.
We were very careful as to who could see it and who couldn't.
Yep.
We had the department keep lists of who could see it and who couldn't see it to
He was
control it.
not on the list.
He was not on the list. We provided to him in November
Yep.
as part of our factual accuracy review.
November when, do you remember?
I could check, but it was
He said
probably
November.
roughly mid-November.
So, are you familiar with what he is undertaking at all?
I'm somewhat, but not, I wouldn't pretend to be completely familiar with it.
He notes that he does not agree with some of your report's conclusions as to predication and how the FBI case was opened.
Again, backfilling. This has nothing to do with the findings of the report as far as the FISA abuse, which was the, 90% of the thrust of this entire thing. He's trying to get you to look over here. Sorry, I keep forgetting the camera's not that wide. Trying to get you to look over here when the ball's right here.
What information do you think he has access to that you did not have access to?
I have no idea.
When you look at Director Ray's letter, he says that his organization, the FBI, provided broad and timely access to all information requested by the OIG, including highly classified and sensitive material. And he accepts that the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was done for an authorized purpose and with adequate factual predication. I'm trying to figure out where the world of evidence exists about predication that you didn't have access to and that FBIA Director Ray would not have access to. Where could John Durham be going for information that is outside of the scope of what you have access to or what FBI Director Ray has access to?
I don't know, and you'd have to ask the Attorney General or Mr. Durham.
I mean, hypothetically, is there some area of evidence that you're aware of that you didn't get access to?
We are not. We got 1 million records. We asked the FBI for all of the materials in their possession, including from other
Couldn't
agencies.
talk to the CIA, Mike.
Is the grand jury operating, do you know?
I have no idea, and I couldn't say if I knew.
Is he going overseas to debrief foreign
He
agents
doesn't
and
know.
No idea. You'd have to talk with him.
interests? Okay.
Wow. Completely
Predication
immaterial.
involves a threshold, does it not?
Correct. For opening an investigation.
Yeah. And when you've hit your predication threshold, more evidence doesn't, as long as the evidence is adequate, more evidence doesn't take it away, correct?
Correct.
So I'm also trying to figure out how it is that even if he had more evidence that you did not have, that takes away from your conclusion that predication was adequate.
Again, I think you'd have to ask him or the Attorney General.
You can't think of a way to get there, can you?
I don't know. As I said earlier, we stand by our findings.
So
ASRS.
you describe serious performance failures in the FISA process. Those are likely to lead to either disciplinary.
No, not in the FISA process. In the people who lied to the court over and over and over again. It's not the process that was necessarily suspect. It was the people involved in the process. Stop trying to whitewash this.
Actions or to sanctions by the court, or at least be considered for those things, correct?
Those are certainly two of the options, yes.
Yes. And in that process, those individuals will have a chance to defend themselves. There's due process involved.
We are not the adjudicators. That goes to the department, the court, or any other entities that might.
So we may find out more as those processes go forward in that context.
Correct, you might.
Okay. Now let's look at the intelligence briefing. At the time of that intelligence briefing, what did the FBI know about how far Russian interests had penetrated into the Trump campaign?
I don't know, as I sit here, the level and extent of the FBI's knowledge. We were looking at the origins of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and these 4 cases.
But the FBI clearly knew that there was an investigation going on because it was their investigation.
Yes, and we lay out here
Yep.
some of what they knew. I just
They
can't
knew
sit
the
here and tell
concerns
you other
about
than
Carter
what's...
Page, correct?
I'm
And
sorry?
they knew the concerns about
Correct.
Carter Page, and he was associated with the Trump campaign.
Correct,
They knew, they had an investigation going on into Michael Flynn at the time.
correct.
Do you know if they knew about the Trump Tower meeting 2 months before the...
Oh my God. Oh my God. The Trump Tower meeting. Are you serious? You freaking hack? Lindsey Graham needs to start pulling an Adam Schiff and telling these guys it's not a valid question. The witness doesn't have to answer that. Screw them.
the intelligence briefing with the
I don't
Russian
know.
agents?
I don't know one way or the other.
Okay.
They weren't
And-
Russian agents.
Going into it, it would be reasonable, wouldn't it, to expect that the FBI did not then know how far Russian penetration into the Trump campaign went?
I have no idea at what stage their investigation was at that point in time. I have no reason to doubt what you're saying, but I don't know if...
They knew the
So
CIA
there was
didn't
no
have
way that they
anything.
could rule out that people present at the intelligence briefing on behalf of the Trump campaign might have actually been involved in the Russian operation.
Oh my God. Oh my God. There was nothing on there was nothing on Flynn whatsoever at that point in time that was even remotely true. You had lies made up about him from the RT dinner and from the complete false narrative that he had an affair with Svetlana Lakova. That's all they quote unquote had on Flynn. So to use that as a predicate to try and pump him for self-incriminating information during what was supposed to be an intelligence briefing, and you think that's okay. Wow. Wow. I hope that happens to your guy next time. I really do.
I have no knowledge of that. All I know as to that is they had the open investigation on Mr. Flynn.
Yeah. So they certainly couldn't rule out when he was actually in that briefing that
As
he
I
was a
said,
potential participant in
Right.
the
How's
matter that they were
Horowitz supposed
looking
to be able
into.
to know
and as
that?
I said, Senator, Crossfire Hurricane was bigger than just the pieces we were looking at, so
Yep.
I can't sit here and tell you what else the FBI may or may not have known at the time.
So while we can agree that putting Crossfire Hurricane agent into the intelligence briefing of the Trump campaign might have been over-aggressive,
Over-aggressive. Yeah. Right. Over-aggressive.
for the FBI to be in that intelligence briefing would be perfectly appropriate, correct?
Oh my God.
In fact, absolutely appropriate for them to be there. That was the debate that went on internally at the FBI, which is what to do, and which they did not discuss either with anyone at the department, the appropriateness of it, or at ODNI. It was the DNI's.
But there was no reason the FBI shouldn't have been in that briefing.
The FBI should have been at that briefing
Precisely.
for intelligence purposes.
For intelligence purposes.
Give an intelligence
and-
briefing.
And it also would have been perfectly appropriate for a Crossfire Hurricane
No.
agent to have debriefed the FBI agent present at the intelligence briefing to see if Michael Flynn had said anything relevant to the investigation, or anybody else for that matter. It was information potentially relevant to the investigation, was it not?
Depending what occurred there, you could foresee a hypothetical where that occurred. I think it raises serious policy questions that frankly, the FBI director needs to sort through and understand with leadership at the department, because that briefing and those briefings are for purposes of protecting campaigns and to allow transitions to occur.
And it was an
effectively.
unusual circumstance.
And-
a participant in that briefing on the part of the Trump campaign was the subject of an FBI investigation.
That is correct, but it raises
I agree with you.
significant
There are plenty of
policy
issues.
questions.
But
There-
we should not draw the conclusion that there's no way the FBI should ever be given access to evidence that arises in the context of an intelligence briefing related to counterintelligence.
And that'll be up to Director Wray as we, in responding to our recommendation, to
Great.
sort through that
Time
policy
has
question.
expired, and thank you.
Thank God I've never been so happy to see 5 minutes end in my life. Oh my God. Are they getting 5 or 10 actually? I don't even remember. But holy crap. Pounding and pounding away on the fact that it should be perfectly fine for an FBI agent who is in a room in order to give an intelligence briefing to a campaign, especially one that is transitioning into being the next occupant of the White House. It's saying, oh yeah, and it's perfectly fine for him to spy on someone because there's this investigation open that there was no decent predicate for. Horowitz didn't have an opportunity to rule on that, did he? This guy is just assuming that it was completely proper for Flynn to be under investigation, when in fact it was a complete and utter gaslight operation. There was no reason for it whatsoever, no legal reason, certainly no factual reason. Oh my God, what a piece of shit.
Thank you. Senator Cruz, if I had just 30 seconds here. In the January meeting with the primary subsource, the Russian guy who provided Steele with all the information, wasn't there a Department of Justice official present at that meeting?
Yes, let me clarify on that. The people present were the primary subsource, his lawyer, 2 FBI Crossfire Hurricane people, and for parts of the interview, lawyers from the National Security Division. They were there not knowing the background necessarily. They were there because the primary subsource had a lawyer.
Okay.
And so the FBI wanted a lawyer there in case there were lawyer issues.
So we're beating up on the FBI, I think appropriately so to some point, but the Department of Justice, they were in the room too.
They were in the room, but the reason we
No, I got
note
you.
this here is there's a number of instances here where people get drive-bys,
No, I got you.
right? And in government, you get a drive-by and
Gotcha.
someone tries to tag you with
I
something
got
that's
you.
not fair.
Fair
That
enough.
was our concern.
Fair enough. Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, can I just close one point from page 341? The FBI's Mr. Baker told
Who's no longer there.
the IG and is quoted in this report as saying that the agent in that investigative briefing, quote, was not there to induce anybody to say anything. He was not there to do an undercover operation or elicit some type of statement or testimony.
Thank
Make
you.
sure that's in the
Very
record.
good.
Thank you.
Senator Cruz.
Yeah, but that's not what actually was true. That's what Baker said. But the FBI notes themselves show that the agent memorialized his conversation with Flynn and Trump, gave it to the group as a fact finding to say, well, here's what I learned from Flynn, here's what I learned from Trump. I don't know if we can do anything with it, but here's what I got out of him. So Baker's statement is entirely self-serving and disproven by the facts that Horowitz brought out in the report itself.
Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, thank you for being here. And I want to start by taking the opportunity to thank not only you,
Senator
but the men and women
Cruz,
of your team that are gathered here.
Superstar.
I think the work that you've done in the Inspector General's office is incredibly important. Reading this report, this is a 434-page report that lays out what I consider to be a stunning indictment of the FBI and the Department of Justice, of a pattern of abuse of power. And I will say both the Department of Justice and FBI for decades have had a great many honorable, principled professionals with a fidelity to rule of law. And this indictment, I'm an alumnus of the Department of Justice. This pattern of facts makes me angry. And it makes anyone who expects law enforcement to be nonpartisan and faithful to the law, it should make them angry as well. Now, the press has focused on your specific conclusion that you did not find evidence of political bias. That's a judgment you have. I disagree with that judgment. But I think that judgment is in many ways the least significant component of this report. I think the facts that are in this report need to be understood, and they should be deeply chilling to anyone who understands the facts in this report, and then people can draw the inference as to why that pattern of abuse occurred.
Do you agree with that?
I'm sorry.
Do you agree with what he just said?
I think everybody can, the purpose of this report is to lay out the facts for the public, and everybody can debate and decide what they think of this information. I absolutely agree.
So this 434-page report outlines 17 major errors and misstatements that were made by the FBI or DOJ in securing FISA warrants. A number of them are deeply, deeply troubling. These are not typos. These are not small inadvertent errors. These are grotesque abuse of power. Let's focus on a couple of them. The primary subsource. Primary subsource, and indeed the first error you note in the second, third, and fourth application for the FISA warrant is that the primary subsource reporting raised serious questions about the accuracy of the Steele dossier, which we now know was a bunch of malarkey, to use a term that's been in the news lately, and that the FISA court was not informed of that. Now let's get specifically, so the basis of this Steele report was what's referred to in your report as the primary subsource. That was the principal basis. And the FBI interviewed that primary subsource not once, not twice, but 3 times in January, March, and May of 2017. So that's the basis of this dossier. What did the primary subsource say? As the OIG report says, the interviews with the primary subsource raised, quote, significant questions about the reliability of the Steele reporting. What did the subsource say specifically? As your report goes on to say, it says Steele misstated or exaggerated multiple sections of the reporting. It says that portions of it, particularly the more salacious and sexual portions, were based on, quote, rumor and speculation. It says that some of the basis of that came from conversations with, quote, friends over beers and statements that were made in, quote, jest. And the primary subsource also says to take the other subsources, quote, with a grain of salt. Now, the FBI had that information, knew that the basis of this dossier was saying it's unreliable. And what did the FBI and DOJ do? In renewal application number 2 and number 3, the FBI advised the court, quote, the FBI found the Russian-based subsource to be truthful and cooperative with 0 revisions. You note that as the most significant misstatement, and that is going in front of a court of law, relying on facts that you know are unreliable without any basis. That was the number one. The number 2 major error in the applications was omitting Carter Page's prior relationship. Now, we now have evidence that Carter Page functioned as a source for a United States intelligence agency. That's a pretty darn important fact. If you're telling the FISA court, hey, the fact that this guy Carter Page, who I don't know this guy Carter Page, but the fact that he's talking to Russians, really suspicious. Well, the fact that he's serving as a source for U.S. intelligence agents is pretty darn relevant to why he's talking to Russians, because we have lots of sources that are talking to bad guys. And when you don't tell the court that, you're deceiving the court. But it's worse than just deceiving the court. Because, as the OIG report details, an assistant general counsel in the FBI altered an email, fabricated evidence, and reading from the OIG report, specifically the words, and not a source, had been inserted into the email. That email then was sent on to the officials responsible for making the decision to go forward. And as the report said, Let me read on page 256 of the OIG report, the final paragraph. Consistent with the Inspector General Act of 1978 and following OIG's discovery that the OGC attorney had altered the email that he sent to the supervising agent, who thereafter relied on it to swear out the final FISA application. So the men and women at home need to know what's happening. A lawyer at the FBI creates fraudulent evidence, alters an email, that is in turn used as the basis for a sworn statement to the court that the court relies on. Am I stating that accurately?
That's correct. That is what occurred.
Now, you have worked in law enforcement a long time. Is the pattern of a Department of Justice employee altering evidence and submitting fraudulent evidence that ultimately gets submitted to a court, is that commonplace? Is that typical?
I have not seen an alteration of an email end up impacting a court document like this.
In any ordinary circumstance, if a private citizen did this, fabricated evidence, and by the way, what he inserted was not just slightly wrong, it was 180 degrees opposite what the evidence said. So the intelligence agency said this guy is a source, and he inserted this guy is not a source. If a private citizen did that in any law enforcement investigation, if they fabricated evidence and reversed what it said, in your experience, would that private citizen be prosecuted for fabricating evidence, be prosecuted for obstruction of justice, be prosecuted for perjury?
They certainly would be considered for that if there was an intentional effort to deceive the court. On this one, I'm going to defer because, as we noted here in the sentence you indicated, we referred that over to the Attorney General and the FBI Director for handling.
Third major omission that the Department of Justice and the FBI did not tell the court is that this entire operation was funded by the DNC, was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and by Democrats. It was an Oppo research dump. Look, at some level, this is the most effective Oppo research dump in history because the Department of Justice and FBI were perfectly happy to be hatchet men for this Oppo research dump. Now, throughout every one of the filings, DOJ and the FBI didn't inform the FISA court that this was being paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Is that right?
That's not in any of the FISA applications.
So they didn't tell the court that. And it's not like DOJ didn't know. And his wife worked at Fusion GPS, the Oppo research company being paid by one of the senior Department of Justice officials, Bruce Orr, by the DNC. And he became the principal liaison with Steele without telling anyone at the Department of Justice that he was essentially working on behalf of the Clinton campaign. Who at the Department of Justice was, and by the way, several Democrats, it's interesting seeing Democratic senators wanting to defend this abuse of power. Several senators, Senator Feinstein said, and I wrote this down, the FBI didn't place spies in the Trump campaign. Senator Leahy said something similar. Well, that may be true, not spies in the Trump campaign, but reading from your report, in particular page 4 of the executive summary.
Here we go.
Your report says, thereafter, the Crossfire Hurricane team used the intrusive techniques, including confidential human sources, to interact and consensually record multiple conversations with Page and Papadopoulos, both before and after they were working for the Trump campaign, as well as on one occasion with a high-level Trump campaign official who was not the subject of the investigation. So they didn't place spies in the campaign, but they sent spies to record senior members of the campaign in the middle of a presidential campaign when that candidate was the nominee for the other major party that was the opposing party to the one in power. Is that right?
They send confidential human sources in to do those.
Did anyone at DOJ, who at DOJ knew about this? Did the Attorney General know about this? Did the White House know about this?
Based on what we found, nobody had been told in advance.
But once
Nobody
it was
knew
happening,
about
did they know?
They did not. The only evidence that somebody knew were the line attorneys in NSD, in the National Security Division, when they were told very selective portions of what had occurred. Nobody knew beforehand. Nobody had been briefed. And frankly, that was one of the most concerning things here, is that nobody needed to be told.
And I can tell you from my time at the Department of Justice and from my time in law enforcement, any responsible leader, when hearing that you're talking about sending in spies and sending in a wiretap on any presidential nominee, should say, what in the hell are we doing? And by the way, the people up the chain who are saying we didn't know, if you had responsible leadership, there's no more important decision than you make. I can tell you when I was at DOJ, if someone said, let's tap Hillary Clinton, or let's tap Bill Clinton or John Kerry, the people there would have said, what in the hell are you talking about? What was going on here? This wasn't Jason Bourne. This was Beavis and Butthead.
This Klobuchar.
All right, I want to tone things down a little bit here. And first want to express my gratitude for the thousands of men and women.
Oh,
who work
God,
every day
Klobuchar.
on the front line with
Let's
the
see if she
FBI.
gets some presidential
I come
sound bites
from a
out of this.
background as a prosecutor, and our local law enforcement work with the FBI every day. In our local office in Minnesota, and then in the Senate, I've had the privilege to work with many, many people in the FBI. And I think the Inspector General's job is incredibly important. He keeps everyone honest. But I do think it's important for those agents and for those in law enforcement that are watching today that people understand. There are people up here that understand that you're simply doing your jobs, which I think is basically, with some suggestions and recommendations for change, what the Inspector General found in this report. So before I start my questions, I think it's important to put this discussion in context with what happened in the 2016 election, which is why we are here today.
This ought to be good.
It is now undisputed by our intelligence agencies that Russia invaded our democracy, not with bombs or jets or tanks, but with a sophisticated cyber mission to undermine the underpinnings of our very democracy. A democracy.
Yeah, a bunch of Facebook ads, half of which didn't appear until after the election, and some Twitter accounts. Incredibly efficient, effective, and horribly sophisticated operation. Right. Klobuchar, let's remember those indictments that Mueller handed down, as if Mueller actually did anything, on those Russians. Indictments aren't proof of anything. Just means that he has some facts that he believes justify these indictments. He's never going to have to stand behind any of them in a court of law. One of the Russians did try to make him face up to discovery, but the judge threw it out because the judge, I believe, rightly pointed out that the Russian was never going to come to court. So it was really a fishing expedition, not actually a move to protect one's client in a prosecution. But and if you're still believing that the Russians hacked the system, the DNC system, you're out of your damn mind. And I think there's proof right now that, in fact, it's in the Horowitz report right now that the FBI screamed and hollered for the Steele dossier to be used as part of the intelligence community assessment of the 2016 election. And the CIA wasn't real keen on using it, but the FBI finally prevailed. The FBI has no proof, nor does the CIA, that the Russians hacked the DNC server. There was no vote meddling. No votes were changed. There was certainly no evidence that even one vote was changed by the amateurish internet activities. So screw you with the sophisticated crap.
Democracy that hundreds of thousands of men and women have lost their lives on the battlefield defending both our democracy and democracies abroad. A democracy that 4 little girls' innocence at the height of the civil rights.
Oh my God. Oh my God. She's bringing up the church bombing. Klobuchar, you know what was going on during that church bombing? COINTELPRO. Martin Luther King's Jr.'s, Dr. King Jr.'s phones were being tapped. He was being followed around. He was being filmed. The FBI sent him a letter saying, hey, we've got all this dirt on you. You might as well just kill yourself to save your family the embarrassment. The FBI was infiltrating black political organizations with the express purpose of bringing them down, violating their First Amendment rights. They would go in and try to agitate for violence. And then if someone agreed, they'd go back to the FBI handler and say, hey, they want to commit violence. They're really aggressive people. Let's shut them down and arrest some folks. That's your FBI back there when those girls were killed, Amy.
Movement lost their lives in a church in Birmingham, Alabama, because people were trying to hold on to that democracy and make sure that it was extended to people in this country. So
yeah, and who was keeping those little girls from enjoying their democracy? The Democrats in charge of the South. Do you remember that, Amy? Like I said, she doesn't give a damn about the hearing. These are presidential sound bites.
So let's remember why we're here today.
Yeah, 4
Let's
little
remember
girls
the
in
words
Birmingham.
of Dan Coates, the former director of the National Intelligence Agency, who served in the Senate, well respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. He said that, in fact, Russia has been emboldened to do this again. And I did appreciate Senator Graham's words that he made clear that it was not Ukraine that invaded this election. It was Russia. And it was the words of Fiona Hill and the impeachment hearings over in the House that I thought were important to remember. She said anyone that is repeating this lie is basically peddling in Russian propaganda. So let's remember that this is not about one election or one party. It is about our democracy. What can we do? Well, we can be honest, and we can stop making political hay out of this, and we can actually take some actions that would protect our election in 2020. And that.
Oh, it's about 2020, folks. It's not about the fact that Carter Page had his life ruined, that General Flynn had his life ruined, that George Papadopoulos had his life ruined, that Paul Manafort, who is a crook, I'm not going to say otherwise, but look what happened to him. The fact that he was yanked out of bed by a guns-drawn FBI raid, pre-dawn raid at his home. That's the FBI we're talking about, Klobuchar. The 2020 election is going to be just fine, and you know why? Because Donald Trump cares about a fair election, which is why during the 2018 midterms, he ordered a cyber strike on the Soviet Union, on Russia, in order to keep their heads down, to keep them from trying to meddle during the election. Now, what did Obama do in 2016? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you can take your concern and shove it up your ass.
That includes finishing the work that Senator Langford and I have started to pass not only the money, which I appreciate, to help states to secure our elections, but to also get in place requirements to push those states that don't have backup paper ballots fully, 11 of them, to get those backup paper ballots, and to make sure we have audits and to make sure we have better communication between federal and state authorities, to do something about the propaganda by actually moving forward on the bill that Senator McCain and I had and that Senator Graham and I now have, the Honest Ads Act, which requires those social media companies, and I have absolutely no idea why we don't do that, to play by the same rules of the road for paid political ads, which would greatly help us, but not completely, but greatly help us with this propaganda problem.
Okay, first of all, what the hell are you talking about? Fair ads? Or honest ads, whatever the hell she just said? What has that got to do with anything we're doing today at all? And secondly, political ads are free speech. Twitter has banned them. YouTube obviously has a policy where if they don't like it, they can pull it without telling you why. The 60 Minutes episode with Leslie Stahl proved that. Susan Wojcicki told Leslie that the Republican ads that they pulled, the Trump ads that they pulled, were in a database, in their transparency database. 60 Minutes looks up those ads. There's not one explanation on one ad why they were pulled. It just lists the ads that they pulled. So at least Facebook is allowing, at least for now, political ads to go unfiltered. Sounds to me like you and Lindsay have a problem with the First Amendment.
So here we go. You wrote this report, Inspector Horowitz, after interviewing more than 100 witnesses and reviewing over 1 million documents. Is that
Yeah,
right?
That's
he
correct.
said that over and
And
over again.
under department guidelines, an investigation has an authorized purpose if it is open to detect, obtain information about, or prevent or protect against federal crimes or threats to the national security, or to collect foreign intelligence. You found that the investigation at issue today was open to determine whether people associated with the Trump campaign were coordinating with the Russian government. Is that right?
That is the reason the FBI provided.
He didn't find that. That's what he was told. That's all he knows. And he has no way to compel them to testify to the truth. Mueller, dang it, I got confused for a second. Durham, however, has a grand jury. At least if he hasn't impaneled it yet, he will be, if not several. And he'll be able to get to the truth. Horowitz is in a very tight lane, wearing oven mitts. Durham is wearing 8-ounce gloves. Boxing reference.
And again, to be clear, you did not find that the FBI acted improperly when it opened the counterintelligence investigation
That's
that
not
you
the point.
reviewed in writing in this report.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? The department's guidelines also require that a decision to open investigation is supported by, as you describe in your report, allegations, reports, facts, or circumstances that indicate the possibility of criminal activity or a national security threat.
Is she gonna read the
You found
entire
that the FBI's
US
investigation was predicated on a report from a friendly foreign government that heard that the Trump campaign had received some kind of suggestion that Russia could help them by releasing information that was damaging to Hillary Clinton. Is that right?
Yeah, the Downer conversation, which was completely debunked by Downer himself when he kept changing the story, went from saying that Papadopoulos told him that the Russians had dirt on Hillary to later saying, well, I don't remember the dirt being used at all. It was something about them being able to help them or something. Downer recorded that conversation, yet for some reason, no one has been allowed to hear that recording. Go figure.
Right.
That's correct.
As a former prosecutor, I know that it is critical that the FBI is able to take an action like it did here to investigate threats to our national security. Do you think that interference in our elections by a foreign government constitutes a national security threat?
Yes, I do.
Okay, that wasn't proven. Carter Page was never charged with a crime. They found 0 on him. No one in the Trump campaign was ever charged with colluding, coordinating, or conspiring with the Russians, ever. No American was ever convicted or even charged with that. The only guy who had anything to do with the Russians was that poor dude who sold them the fake IDs so they could open bank accounts and make payments to Facebook and Twitter in dollars, not rubles. That poor guy was charged with identity theft and other crimes, went to jail, but he never knew they were Russians. Not at all. He was just some dude who's a criminal and who sells fake identities. Never knew he was dealing with the Russians. So, Americans working with Russians, 0. I have to read this real quickly. Blue Peahen just typed in a couple minutes ago. Andrea Mitchell reporting, quote, egregious, very clear mistakes made by the FBI. Oh, my God. Oh, that's beautiful, Blue Peahen. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Does anything in your report call into question the finding in the special counsel's report that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion?
No, it doesn't. In fact, we cite the special counsel's report here in a footnote, laying out all the different reports that have been released on that issue.
Does anything in your report call into question Chairman Burr's statement, the Republican Chairman Burr's statement, that, quote, Russia is waging an information warfare campaign against the U.S. that didn't start and didn't end with the 2016 election?
No, it doesn't.
So what? My God, so what? It started with the Soviets in 1920, and it's been going on ever since. Of course, the thing is, though, lefties like you have been welcoming the Russians and the Soviets into the country. Lefties like you have no problem dealing with the Russians and the Soviets in a very open and friendly way, if not in some instances absolutely spying for them, like Alger Hiss. And who got Alger Hiss? Who's the one who finally tracked down his secret typewriter and proved that Alger Hiss was sending information, government information, to the Soviets? Richard Nixon. And you guys on the left never forgave him for that. That's why his presidency was so short. You made him so paranoid because you were constantly coming after him that he did what every Democrat president since at least Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had done, which was spy on his political opponents. Every one of them. But Nixon is the one who got rung up for it. Why? Because the left and the press hated him. Now, did he do wrong? Absolutely he did wrong. But he's the only one who got called on the carpet for it.
Does anything in your report call into question the assessment by FBI Director Wray that Russians' interference in our elections is ongoing and that its interference in the 2018 midterms were a, quote, dress rehearsal, end quote, for the 2020 elections?
There was
No,
no
it doesn't.
interference in the 2018
Does anything in your
election.
report call into question the finding in the special counsel's report that, quote, the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and work to secure that outcome?
We don't take issue with any part of the special counsel's report, no.
Okay.
Yeah. The stupidity, I can't. Come on, more about Russia, Amy.
Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper consideration affected the FBI's decision to open the investigation into George Papadopoulos?
No, we don't.
Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Paul Manafort?
No, we don't.
Did you
Yeah, nothing to do with the Black Ledger that started the whole thing, that the Ukrainians provided to Alexandra Chalupa, the DNC operative, who not only visited the Ukrainian embassy on numerous occasions in D.C., but if I'm not mistaken, chat, correct me if I'm wrong, she also visited the White House on at least 2 occasions. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what I remember, but I can't put my finger on that actual fact at the moment.
Did you find any evidence that political bias or other improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Michael Flynn?
We did not.
Did you find any investigation that political bias or other
Please.
improper considerations affected the decision to open the investigation into Carter Page?
No documentary or testimonial evidence or other evidence.
So we are clear, did your report uncover systematic political bias at the FBI?
As to what we looked at and the openings, we did not find documentary testimonial evidence to support a finding of bias.
And again, that's not the important part of the investigation. As far as I'm concerned, it's ancillary and it's wrong. But the Democrats are going to eat out on this for as long as it takes for the Durham report to come out. And then they're going to say, well, Horowitz disagrees with you. And Horowitz was right there. He's the DOJ IG. How could you know better than he does when you look at all the investigation he did? By the way, there's remember, again, the Papadopoulos and General Flynn investigations were started well before Crossfire Hurricane got going and were obvious forgeries. Read Greg Jarrett's book, read Dan Bongino's book, and it's all laid out in black and white.
Can you comment on why it is critical that the American people have confidence in the rule of law and the independence of the Justice Department?
Absolutely. I also was a former prosecutor and federal prosecutor previously. I did public corruption cases in the Southern District of New York. And the whole foundation of the Justice Department and law enforcement on the federal level and at the state and local level is apolitical, non-political decision-making made by prosecutors and agents working together to protect communities.
Very good. I want to follow up on your discussion on the issue you briefly discussed, whistleblowers, with Senator Feinstein, because it's so important, and I know that Senator Grassley also cares a lot about this issue. Can you speak generally to how often in your career information provided to whistleblowers has proved important and led to uncover wrongdoing?
Well, I'll speak to certainly my experience in the 7 years as IG, as in the first instance. From the get-go, fast and furious, critical that the agents came forward there.
Yeah.
We've found
And what happened?
numerous instances
Nothing.
in our audits and our reviews with whistleblowers coming forward and reporting evidence. And I'll add, going back 30 years to my career as a prosecutor in New York, doing police corruption cases, we had a incredibly brave and courageous police officer who saw corruption in his midst and came forward and reported it, and
Talking about Serpico?
allowed us to make a very substantial police corruption case that would have continued but for that courageous officer.
He's got to be
Thank
talking
you
about
very much.
Serpico.
That's really
That man's a
helpful.
hero. Yeah, you're right,
Last,
Stevie. Serpico.
After
Yep.
your report was released on Monday, Attorney General Barr stated his opinion that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions. When the FBI decided to open its investigations, the U.S. Intelligence Committee was already aware of Russian efforts to interfere with the 2016 election.
And
Is that
Obama
correct?
did nothing about it.
I'm actually not sure what the Intelligence Committee knew at the time.
It was in that context that the FBI received information. I'm just going to let's.
I'm just going to
go
waste
forward,
your
understand
time.
your answer. That the FBI received information from a foreign government, which we know from reports came from an Australian diplomat. They reported that a Trump campaign official suggested that the Trump campaign had received some kind of suggestion from Russia that would assist the campaign by releasing information that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign. Is that
Not against the law, however. It's not. That information is not covered by the Federal Election Commission prohibition against aid from foreign countries. It has to be something of value, and there is no value placed on information because how can you put a monetary amount on information? Were the DNC emails worth $5 million, $100 million, or $1? There's no way to put a value on it. So it can't be included in the FEC prohibition against foreign aid to a campaign. If it was against the law, then the entire Steele dossier, which the bullshit FISA process was predicated upon, would have been illegal. And Hillary would have been taken to task for doing that. as it was, she is on the hook for a campaign finance violation because they did not properly delineate the money that they gave to Perkins Coie. They merely labeled it as legal fees, something like that, as opposed to using that money being used to then engage Fusion GPS. But again, rules for thee, not for me.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Your report also quoted then Chief of the National Security Division, David Loffman, who said that it would have been a, quote, dereliction of duty and responsibility of the highest order not to commit the appropriate resources as urgently as possible to run these facts to the ground and find out what's going on.
Define appropriate resources, Klobuchar. Do you think opening a secret investigation into this, instead of just going to Downer, listening to his phone call, his phone recording of the conversation and determining, well, actually that was never said, because Papadopoulos denies saying what Downer says he said. Papadopoulos also denies being drunk at that meeting, which Downer claimed. And knowing Downer and his being completely in the bag for Hillary and the Clinton Foundation, I have much more of a reason to believe George Papadopoulos than I do to believe High Commissioner to Great Britain from Australia, Alexander fucking Downer.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
In light of all of that was occurring at that time, and it's always easy in hindsight to look back at things, but at that time, do you agree with Attorney General Barr that the investigation was predicated on the thinnest of suspicions?
Well, I'm not going to get into a comparison on what his view. He's free to have his opinion. We have our finding, and as I said earlier, I stand by our conclusion.
And your conclusion, again, is?
That it was sufficient predication to open the investigation based on the low threshold required by department and FBI policy.
And there you go. That is the most important part of that answer. Low threshold. Remember, we read yesterday in Chapter 2 about the incredibly low bar that is required to start a counterintelligence investigation into someone. It is basically barely probable cause. Is as small of a shaving as you can take from probable cause, the definition of it, that's all that's required by the FBI to open a counterintelligence investigation. There are a lot of maybes, ifs, perhapses, shoulds in that guideline for the FBI for opening these investigations. It's as far as I'm concerned, vague and Byzantine. I'm not saying there should be no counterintelligence investigations. Don't get me wrong. They are incredibly important to the safety and well-being of the United States of America, and I fully support being able to thwart any types of illegal activity brought on by foreign governments. But it required so little actual evidence to open this up. I'll say it again. It's J. Edgar Hoover stuff. It really is.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for wasting
Thank
our
you.
time,
We
Amy.
talked a lot about Page, just briefly about Papadopoulos.
Yes.
I don't want anybody to believe that anybody named in the initial investigation has been convicted of being an agent of the Russians. Has anybody associated with the Trump campaign been charged with the crime of colluding with the Russians?
Not that I know of as I sit here.
No, I think we would know by now. Mr. Papadopoulos, he was actually being surveilled by the FBI, is that correct?
If you're talking about the confidential human source
Yes.
operations, yes, they did CHS operations with him. They considered but did not proceed to seek a FISA application.
Okay,
instead.
well, but he was being wiretapped and he didn't know it.
Well, he was being an undercover operation and having a wire with a
He's
confidential
talking to
report.
somebody that's got a
Human
wire.
source. Right, I just want to be careful because
Okay.
you do a wire, you think of a court order, court
No,
authorization.
trust me,
I just
know
want to be
this wasn't
careful in
done
how I
with
say
With
that.
a court order. So this is.
They
done
also went
because
through
they
all of
can
his
do it.
bank
Correct.
records and
They
his
can do it. They
emails.
don't have to get anybody's permission.
Well, they need the supervisory approval within the
on
Bureau,
page-
that's it.
331, I just want you to know what Papadopoulos said when he didn't know he was being wiretapped. No, we don't want to work with the Russians, basically. I'm summarizing here. That'd be treason. Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, thank you for being here, and to all of your team. You've done important work, so thank you to all of you, and rows 1 and 2 as well. There are a number of things that are really troubling, but some of them have been unpacked pretty fully so far, so I'm gonna pick up some loose ends. Bruce Orr, who is he, and what's his role at the department? And then let's ask some questions about the bizarre pathway by which he became involved in this investigation.
So at the time of these events, he was an associate deputy attorney general and the head of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, working out of the deputy attorney general's office.
The Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force, and that's connected to election interference by the Russians. How?
It is not.
What the hell's he doing here?
That was precisely the concern, that we lay out here. He had no role in any of the election interference matters.
We have a bunch of people in the media who wanted to read this as a Rorschach test, and they wanted to have a predetermined answer for exactly how to interpret each piece of this. And so as the chairman began today, he said, predicate of investigation appropriate, but some minor mistakes and errors were made. You've outlined in this 478 or 434, depending on whether we count all the Roman numerals, page report, 17 significant errors in this investigation. Bruce Orr, who has a very significant senior role, ODAG, for those who don't know, the Office of the Deputy Attorney General, has primary oversight of all law enforcement agencies in America. So if you're in the FBI and you might make a mistake in your investigation, the people you'd be in trouble with normally are in the Deputy Attorney General's office. And here's a guy in the Deputy Attorney General's office who ultimately gets involved, inserts himself into this investigation. And I think it's pretty important to recognize we've got a massive cultural systemic failure. If a guy from ODAG who should be doing oversight of this case, if he weren't off on another assignment about organized crime and drug trafficking, if he were going to get involved in this, he should be checking the work of the people who were doing the work. And there are a whole bunch of department protocols and provisions that were violated throughout this. But Bruce Orr, he ultimately decides to get extra information out of Christopher Steele after Christopher Steele or his employer, Fusion GPS, had been cut off by the FBI. Why did the FBI decide to no longer listen to Christopher Steele?
So he was closed in November of 2016 after the FBI learned of his disclosure to Mother Jones magazine that he had been working with the FBI previously.
And we know from the evidence that Senator Cruz went through, there were a whole bunch of subsources that Christopher Steele was summarizing, and the FBI at that point was believing he might be a credible guy. And they ultimately realized that this is a bunch of BS, and his subsources are saying, I said some of this in jest, and some of it's stuff that I overheard in a bar. None of it is information that I had firsthand knowledge of. And so the FBI decides, reasonably, that Mr. Steele's information isn't credible, right? So they cut him off.
Actually, let me just be clear. That isn't what caused them to cut him off. What caused them to cut him off is they learned he had talked to the press in Mother Jones magazine. They actually had that other information and didn't tell anybody about it.
Okay, so
At the
so you're disagreeing with me only to say the problems with Mr. Steele are twice as bad as I summarized.
I'm just saying that isn't why they cut him off.
Okay.
Right? That's the concern, is that
So
they...
then Bruce
doing
Orr,
it.
who doesn't have any responsibilities in this area, decides he'll insert himself into the investigation and go get additional information from or about Christopher Steele and the people who are funding Christopher Steele. Can you just remind us, who's Bruce Orr married to?
Bruce Orr's spouse, Nellie Orr, had formerly been, at the time he started interacting in November 2016.
Oh, Uncle Bobby, damn it,
with
that's
Steele,
funny.
Had been a former independent contractor for Fusion GPS.
So in other words, Bruce Orr decides to insert himself into an investigation after the professional agents involved in this investigation said Mr. Steele isn't reputable, isn't credible, and has been talking to the media. So we're now not going to talk to Christopher Steele anymore. Bruce Orr says, actually, I should. And he meets with these people who are funding or who are the employers of Christopher Steele or own his dossier, who's also Bruce Orr's wife's source of compensation.
Had been.
Had been.
As of, I think, September 2016, she had no longer been an independent contractor. And I want to also, I think it's important to be clear, because this is relevant again to the significance of some of the inappropriate actions here, the FBI was not a reluctant participant in this relationship that was the conduit from through Broussard to Steele, as we lay out here. So I just want to be clear, they're not saying we don't want to deal with him. They're saying, oh yeah, essentially, if you have something, we would love to hear from you.
I want to just say that I wish Mike Lee weren't sitting here 2 people away from me right now, because as a national security hawk, I have argued with Mike Lee in the 4.5 or 5 years that I've been in the Senate that stuff just like this couldn't possibly happen at the FBI and at the Department of Justice. So as somebody who is embarrassed on behalf of the FBI about your report, because I believe that it is critically important that we have the FISA statute. I think the FISC is an incredibly important court. The approval rating of applications that come before the FISC are off the charts. I don't know the current numbers, but a couple years ago when I saw them, I think it was 97.9%. Is that a fair?
I think the last number I saw was roughly 98%.
Okay, so a 98% approval rating of applications that come before the FISC. Why would it be that high? People would normally say, and I'm not asking you to answer that. I'm saying that the good answer is, in an ex parte, I'm not an attorney, but an ex parte proceeding before the court, when you, the American citizen who might be being surveilled or be suspected of something that would open a surveillance warrant against you, the assumption would be, if you can't be there to defend yourself, it's because the department's lawyers are so super scrupulous that if there's any information that might exonerate you or that might counteract the view that led them to first pursue a theory of the case that had them wanting to surveil you, they would say the bar is so high here, we'll always err on the side of privacy unless we believe there's a good reason to pursue this investigation. And so Mike Lee has warned me for 4.5 years, the potential for abuse in this space is terrible, and I constantly defended the integrity and the professionalism of the Bureau and of the department that you couldn't have something like this happen. Let's move on from Broussard and move to the renewals. The renewals, the first one we can have a debate about. That's been the headline about whether or not there was political bias that led to the opening of the investigation. The second, the third, and the fourth warrant against, or FISA proceeding against Carter Page are based on an assumption the court has that, hey, we got a bunch of information the first time we heard this case, and if we thought it was legitimate to open a case into this guy, the Bureau is going to have so much integrity and the department's lawyers are going to have so much integrity. If there's ever a reason for them to doubt information that led to the opening application they made to us, they'll bring us that information. So in renewals 2, 3, and 4, they bring none of this information, right?
That's correct. They're not telling the department, so the lawyers at the department can decide what to include for the court.
So I think we face a massive crisis of public trust in American life in general, partly because an open society is going to be susceptible to the kinds of influence operations that Russia runs against us on a daily basis in a clunky way, but that China is eventually going to run against us in a very sophisticated way. The real debate we should be having on TV and in the print journalist community about moments like this is not fundamentally about making this month 48 or month 49 of the 2016 presidential election that will never die. We should be having an advanced conversation about 2024, 2028, and 2032 when China with deepfakes runs influence operations against us that are going to be far more sophisticated and far more dangerous than this. And so if the Bureau functions this poorly during a moment like this, when we actually have a really sophisticated attack against the U.S., we're going to have a much, much bigger problem if the American people don't think they can trust this. And so whether or not people are going to agree with your opening headline on whether or not political bias was a relevant factor in the opening in the investigation, there is no doubt that there's a massive cultural failing inside DOJ and at the FBI that would allow renewals to come in the second, third, and the fourth case without anybody ever thinking that their work is going to be scrutinized again. If this is what happens, and this is arguably the second, third, or fourth most important investigation in the history of the FBI, if this can happen in an investigation where they would expect there's going to be a lot of subsequent scrutiny, what is your suspicion about what happens in a regular FISA application or renewal process? If the American people hear this and they say this can happen against a campaign for the presidency of the United States, what happens in an ordinary FISA case?
That was exactly our concern and why we started this week a new review and audit to look at others, not only on the intel side, counterintelligence side, but on the counterterrorism side and on U.S. persons. What else is going on there? We want to be fair. We don't want to do it just on this, but for the reasons you indicated, if it's happening here, what's going on elsewhere?
I want to summarize something that you say on page 14, which is to this point, because so many people are just reading this hearing or listening to this hearing through the lenses of who their favorite red or blue jersey team was in the 2016 election. But you're saying something really fundamental about a culture that Director Wray needs to rebuild. Quote, there are so many basic and fundamental errors, were made by 3 separate hand-picked teams on one of the most sensitive FBI investigations that was briefed to the highest levels within the FBI, and that the FBI officials expected would eventually be subjected to close scrutiny, raised significant questions regarding the FBI chain of command's management and supervision of the FISA process. Jumping ahead, in our view, this was a failure of not only the operational team, but also of the managers and the supervisors, including the senior officials in the chain of command. For these reasons, we recommend that the FBI review of the performance of these employees and who had the responsibility for the preparation, the Woods review, which is essentially where you check your work and you say, do we have any footnotes and could we corroborate this if we had to, if asked by the FISA court or other supervisors, or, picking up your quote again, approval of the FISA applications as well as the managers and supervisors in the chain of command of the Carter Page investigation, including senior officials, and take appropriate action, action deemed appropriate. This means potential discipline and firing, I assume. In addition, given the extensive compliance failures we identified in this review, we believe that additional OIG oversight work is required to assess the FBI's compliance with the department and FBI FISA-related policies that seek to protect the civil liberties of the U.S. persons, also known as the whole Fourth Amendment. Accordingly, we have today initiated, this is a big headline, folks, and accordingly, today we have initiated an OIG audit that will further examine the FBI's compliance with the Woods procedures in FISA applications that target U.S. persons in both counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations. That's a
Well, folks, no
big
need for
headline.
us to read the
You're
report.
saying
SAS just
there is
did it for
a
us.
systematic cultural failure of accountability at the Bureau related to the FISA process. Mike Lee doesn't drink, but I'd buy him whiskey right now if he did, because there are a whole bunch of things we've argued about for a long time, and he's right about things that I think ought not be right. And if we had another 10-minute round, Lindsay's round was 94 minutes, so I'm going to go over by at least 25 seconds. If we had time for another round, I think we should ask some really fundamental questions about the defensive briefing as well. In the American system, when the people get to pick politicians to represent them, for a time, the politicians aren't better people than the bureaucrats, but they're the ones who hold certificates of election. When the people are elected, those
Come on,
politicians
Stas, wrap it
incoming
up.
don't know as much as the bureaucrats at the top levels of the agencies because the agency experts have been there for a long time. That's what the defensive briefing should be about, not an investigatory Trojan horse.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Inspector General Horowitz, I'm impressed by the thoroughness.
Just for a second, okay. Compare and with SRS 4859, you bring up Nadler pounding the gavel. Compare Nadler and how he handles a hearing, which is mishandles a hearing, to what Lindsay just did. SAS warned Lindsay he was going over. Lindsay gave him that extra few seconds, and then as SAS continued to go on, what did Lindsay do? He tapped his gavel twice. You could just hear it over the microphones, which means SAS heard it. He's sitting right there. SAS kept going, so Lindsay just tapped it a couple more times. And then finally, Lindsay interrupted him as SAS was getting to his last 10 or 12 words. But letting SAS know he was done. Compare that to Nadler. Just whacking away with his gavel. Because the man has no self-control whatsoever. He does not know how to control a committee. He has no understanding of the House of Representatives versions of Robert's Rules of Order, at all. Again, say what you will about Lindsey Graham, love him or hate him. I know he can be a polarizing figure. I know the things he said about Trump during the election, but I personally am more concerned about policy than politics. So I don't care what happened during the election. I just don't. But again, compare Lindsay just now to Nadler at any time during any hearing he chairs. It's just, words fail me in trying to come up with a way to describe that comparison.
Of your team's work. You reviewed 1 million documents and conducted interviews of more than 100 witnesses, including several on multiple occasions. I think it was 170 interviews. Would you agree with me broadly that this is a testament to the rule of law and the transparency of our system, that your office can produce such a searching and thorough report that contains some criticism of the most powerful federal law enforcement agency in our nation?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, and it's a testament to the Congress for creating the Inspector General community.
This is why we have your office and Inspector General, to provide an independent assessment of the facts that's not beholden to any particular partisan agenda. FBI Director Chris Wray said in his response to your report that the FBI, and I quote, accepts the report's findings and embraces the need for thoughtful, meaningful remedial action. Let me just begin by expressing my appreciation to you and to Director Wray for being guided by the facts rather than some of the more breathless conspiracy theories that have been spread recently. President Trump has called the entire Russia investigation a witch hunt and a hoax, but your report found that the FBI had an authorized purpose when it opened its investigation into whether individuals associated with that campaign were coordinating with the Russian government's broad efforts to interfere in our 2016 presidential election, which was grounded in protecting our national security. Do you stand by that conclusion?
And we stand by our conclusion.
So let's talk.
Yeah, and the Obama administration knew about the Russian meddling, and when the Obama's security advisor was told about it, she said, stand down, because Obama didn't want anything to sully Queen Hillary's election. And he didn't want any word to get out that there was any shenanigans, any malarkey going on that would have tainted her victory. Now, after she lost, then everybody lost their shit. Remember what Obama said about Trump, saying he might not accept the results of the election because of all the Democratic voter fraud that's so prevalent, especially in California? Obama was like, that's un-American. That's traitorous. How could anyone say that before the results of the election are even heard? What are the Dems doing now? They're saying they have to impeach Trump to protect the integrity of the 2020 election. Nancy said it the other day. It's not about Ukraine, which is what I thought started this whole thing. She said it's not about Ukraine, it's about Russia. They can't let go. Uncle Bobbity, help, my political party failed and we can't get up. Yes, the entire Democratic Party needs a life alert bracelet. I mean, Hillary needed one anyway. I mean, she fell like a sack of potatoes in 75-degree heat. Or was it 76? Yeah, definitely. Life alerts for everyone. Come on, Nancy, raise the money.
Talk about what we all know was happening in 2016 when this investigation began. Russian intelligence hacked the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. Does your report disprove that finding of the Russia investigation?
No, we don't disprove
Doesn't
any
get
of the
into that,
findings.
idiot.
We also know Russian intelligence was strategically acting to release stolen emails through WikiLeaks, through DC Leaks, with an intention to try and help Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and you don't disagree with that?
We don't disagree with it, and we don't address
The
it.
Russian internet.
His not disagreeing with it doesn't mean he has given approval to it, and that is an out-and-out lie. And once again, the Democrats are backfilling this entire thing, talking about stuff that has nothing to do with the FISA abuses. Again, even if Durham says, you know what, Crossfire Hurricane did have proper predication. It did. I was wrong earlier. Now that I've looked into it more, they had reasonable cause, probable cause to go in there and do that. Carter Page was never found guilty, never charged with anything, much less found guilty. The Democrats, the FBI knew by January, mid-January, that the Steele dossier was completely fake. And they still proceeded with 3 FISA renewals based on that same crap. That is the point. The rest of this doesn't matter. That's the point. So own up, put your big boy panties on, and agree that the FBI railroaded a Trump campaign affiliate, and shut the fuck up.
That research agency conducted a coordinated influence campaign on social media to try and tear apart American society, to sow discord. And
Who's
your
tearing
report
apart
doesn't
American
disagree with
society
that,
right
Correct.
now, huh?
So
Who?
let me just, in summary, when the FBI opened this investigation known as Crossfire Hurricane, Russia was at that time engaging in an unprecedented and broad-scale
Oh, my
attack on
God.
our election and our...
Unprecedented. You know how much that word means to me. This is the first time I've heard it used. BTE, though, before Trump election. But they're conflating the Russian interference with Trump being elected. So it's basically, I would say, the border between before Trump election and after Trump election, ATE. The Soviets did all, I mean, we had communist parties running for president. Does anybody remember Gus Hall? Come on. Oh. Unprecedented. The Democrats have no sense of history, no sense of self-effacement, no sense of self-awareness. It's all projection. It's all lies. That King James, Facebook ads. Exactly. Huge, coordinated, intelligent, sophisticated Facebook ads and some Twitter accounts. Wow. And again, half the ads didn't even run until after the election. Oh, are we buffering again? Okay, it looks like we're back. Let me check the stream connection here real fast. That hasn't updated. That's weird. Anyway, we're still going, so thank you for saying that. I'm glad you guys are keeping track. Keeps me honest. All right, let's get back to this idiot.
our democracy. Then candidate Trump's response wasn't to denounce Russia's actions. It was to say, and I quote, as a candidate, Russia, if you're listening, I hope
Oh, my God.
you're able to find Hillary's emails. It was to praise WikiLeaks for...
And what did he say after that? I'm sure our media will be very grateful. Not my campaign, not the Republican Party, the media. Conveniently leave that out all the time, do we? Are you going to quote Charlottesville next? Back's doing fine, King James. Thanks.
It was
It's
even
hanging
to
right in
suggest
there.
that Russia was not responsible. It might be someone weighing
I
400
created a
pounds sitting on their bed in their mother's
fake
home.
footrest to
So
take the
all this was
pressure off my
happening
back.
while the FBI was trying to protect our elections and our democracy. I would have preferred to see our president criticize then the Russians who were attacking our elections.
How
But
about
to your report, if I might.
your president
Bill
doing something
Priestap,
about
who
it?
was Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, approved the opening of the FBI investigation into possible connections between the Trump campaign and Russian interference. He told your office there was a counterintelligence concern that the FBI was obligated to investigate. Did you find any evidence at all to suggest Mr. Priestap's actions were motivated by bias, by his political views, by partisanship, rather than his sense of obligation to protect the country?
We did not.
If Priestap is such a great guy, why isn't he still at the FBI?
On March 4th, 2017, President Trump tweeted, "Terrible. Just found out Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower before my victory.
Very good,
Nothing
Laura.
found. This is McCarthyism." Did your investigation identify any evidence President Obama ordered the FBI to tap Donald Trump's phone?
We didn't find any evidence the FBI had tapped any other phones or anything else other than the FISA that we addressed.
But
The New York Times stated, before Trump said anything, that the Obama administration had tapped Trump's communications I don't remember if they said via a campaign aid or not, but the New York Times even used the word wiretap in the headline. I guess you forgot that.
But you did find that an FBI employee doctored an email in order to support the Carter Page FISA application, correct?
Correct.
Well, as your report concludes,
Yeah, that's the only thing that happened that was done wrong. That's it.
and as many have said, I'm here to restate that that's inexcusable, and we must hold federal law enforcement to the highest standards, even those
only
of us
that
who
is
support federal law
inexcusable.
enforcement. Let me ask a question about the response of the agency. Who appointed FBI Director Chris Wray?
Oh, my God.
President Trump.
And did Director Wray accept all of the findings of your investigation?
He did.
And that includes your finding that the investigation and related investigations were opened for an authorized purpose with adequate predication. Did he agree with that?
That's correct.
Okay.
Christopher Wray is in charge of the FBI. Tom Fitton has a FOIA request against the FBI that has been open for, what, over a year and a half? In fact, the FOIA request was launched 2 years ago, and they had to take the FBI to court in order to get their documents released. And the FBI is releasing 500 pages a month, and they say they will not have completed the FOIA request until 2021. That's a direct quote from Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch. If Chris Wray is such a great guy, and he's, just a stand-up director of the FBI, why is he slow-rolling those documents? Why? Because he is first and foremost a political creature, and he is trying to protect the FBI from the obvious scorn and derision it has brought upon itself through the Comey administration and partly now through the Wray administration. I think Christopher Wray is as great of an FBI director. In fact, no, let me take that back. He is less of an FBI director than Jeff Sessions was an Attorney General, in my opinion.
Your report identified errors the FBI made in conjunction with the Page FISA applications. We shouldn't minimize those errors, but I think it's critical to put them in context. Your report doesn't speculate as to whether a FISA warrant would have been authorized for Mr. Page if officials had considered all the relevant information in a timely way. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't speculate on what the
And
outcome
Mr.
would have
Page
been.
wasn't indicted in the Russia investigation.
He was not charged as far as I understand.
But the president's campaign manager, deputy campaign manager, national security advisor, foreign policy advisor, personal attorney, and longtime strategist were all either convicted of crimes or pled guilty in federal
God.
courts. Is that correct?
Oh, my God.
I think I followed the list, but I
Roughly.
understand what you're saying. I won't disagree with you. Let me.
Did you identify FISA errors with regards to any other Trump campaign official who'd been under investigation?
The only FISA we found existed was the one we've written about here as to Carter Page.
So within the broader context of the Trump campaign and the investigation and the outcome, I just thought it was worth repeating that the Mueller investigation produced 37 indictments, guilty pleas.
Oh, my God. Now we're back to Mueller. Now we're back to Mueller again. Russia, Russia, Russia. He mentioned, this jerk, I don't even know his name and I don't care, mentioned one, I almost said mistake, one glaring fuck up by the FBI, and now he's acting as if that was the only thing that was done wrong. Because Mueller, because Trump, because Russia. Wow. Whitewash, backfill, and rehabilitate. So now he's whitewashing the FBI and he's rehabilitating it at the same time.
And convictions, and none of those are called into question by your report. Is that correct?
We don't address those at all.
So one point with
My
some
God.
bipartisan agreement today, one of the only points I've heard with bipartisan agreement today is a renewed interest in reforming the FISA process.
Oh, so you don't have a bipartisan opinion regarding the guy who the lawyer just above or just below Baker, who falsified a document completely in a way to make it look like Carter Page was not who the CIA said he is, that he lied through his teeth about it. He falsified a document in order to help get the last FISA application through. You don't agree that that was a bad thing, or you just forgot about it?
And while we continue to consider as the Senate reauthorizing sections of the Patriot Act, I'd welcome suggestions from FBI Director Wray as to statutory reforms to ensure the errors we saw here in the Page process don't happen again, while ensuring the FBI has the authorities it needs to protect our nation. I'm encouraged Director Wray fully accepts your specific recommendations, but I think Congress should also consider reforms to safeguard civil liberties. In this regard, I'm more in Senator Lee's camp than Senator Sass's. IG Horowitz, do you believe some of the problems your report uncovered would benefit from congressional action to reform the FISA process?
We haven't talked about that, but that's a very important point, Senator. As you know, we make recommendations to the department. We don't make recommendations to Congress. Congress, though, has, I think, important issues to think about in this report as to how this process can be improved and ensure that these kind of errors are addressed going forward.
Well, Inspector General, I am grateful for your service and for your work. Let me just conclude with one last question. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that FBI agents and officials were biased against him and worked to favor the campaign of his opponent, Hillary Clinton. In your investigation, did you find that the FBI took any investigative step based on political bias against now President Trump?
I'm going to be careful on that because of the referral we made per the IG Act on the altered email and some of the other issues we found on the FISA.
But did you find any substantive investigative step that was influenced by political bias?
Again, I'm going to be careful because we have a situation where we have the altered email by the individual who, as we know in the footnotes,
Not going to get your way, are you?
Text messages that were concerning that were identified last year. So I'm going to defer on what the rationale might have been.
What that one-step rationale might have been. But overarching, your conclusion was that the initiation of this investigation was well predicated and was for a lawful purpose.
The initiation.
In terms of the
say that in
opening,
the
going back
first
to the
time?
opening, correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Inspector General, for your report.
But as to everything that followed the opening, there's a lot of concern?
I have a lot of concerns about the FISA process and how that occurred. Not, to be clear, the confidential informant issue raises significant policy questions, but we found they complied with the policies there.
Peter Strzok worked for who?
Well, over time, he moved up the chain. So, but at some of the key times here, Mr. Priestap.
Okay. Senator Hawley.
Let me just start where Senator Coons left off. So you have said that you had significant concerns about the authorization or the application for the FISA warrants, right? You said earlier when it came to political bias, when you move to the FISA warrants, things get murkier. I believe that was the word you used. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because, you know, you can open an investigation. I say this as a former law enforcement official myself. You can open an investigation pretty easily. You've testified today that it can be done quite easily. But when you actually start taking action, start taking steps, start gathering evidence, start surveilling Americans, that's when actually real questions arise. And your testimony today has been, and in this report, is that when that happened, there's potential concerns here about political bias. Is that correct?
We have actions taken here that were not consistent with the rules, the practices, the policies, and what we couldn't reach a conclusion on is what motivated that.
Yeah, I think that's very significant. I mean, let me just be honest with you. Here's the question that I'm struggling with. Which is worse? Is it worse to have a foreign government trying to meddle in our elections? Or is it worse to have our own government meddling in the election? Because that's, I think, exactly what this report shows. It shows that our government, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the nation, the FBI, effectively meddled in an ongoing presidential campaign. And the thing that gets me is you expect it from foreign governments. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that you expect it. They've been doing it for years. Russia's been doing it for years. We know they tried to do it this last cycle. China has been doing it. Others have been doing it. And we know what steps to take. We've got to take them more effectively. But when our own government does it, how can the American people have confidence? And what do we do? I mean, what do we do? And there's one actor here, I think, who has not gotten the credit that they collectively deserve, and that's the Democrat National Committee. I just think, you know, I've heard my friends on the other side of the aisle complain about Hillary Clinton's campaign and how ineffective it was and how the DNC didn't do a good job in 2016. I beg to differ. This is the most incredible. The DNC pays for the Steele dossier, solicits the Steele dossier, and then gets the Federal Bureau of Investigation to go get FISA warrants surveil an American citizen, surveil a presidential campaign, all on the basis of this manufactured garbage that they paid for. I mean, that's extraordinary. That has got to be a first time in history. In fact, let me just ask you, Mr. Horowitz, are you aware ever of another presidential campaign being targeted by the FBI during the campaign like the Trump one was, to your knowledge? Has this ever happened?
To my knowledge, but I wouldn't suggest I'm an expert on.
But to your knowledge, no.
As I
you're
sit
not
here,
aware
I
of
don't
anything
know.
like this. So, and I'm correct in thinking that the Steele dossier, the Fusion GPS dossier, was solicited by and paid for the DNC. I mean, that's correct based on what we know, isn't it?
Or the Clinton campaign or the DNC, it was ultimately learned by the FBI that that was the case, or that came to be their belief.
And then, so we get the Steele dossier, it's fed to the FBI. The FBI goes and asks for these FISA warrants, which have all of the problems that you have articulated and that my colleagues have drawn out, including sometimes outright fabrication of evidence in these FISA applications. And then, not only does the FBI get a surveillance program ongoing, effectively, of a presidential campaign during cycle, but they also get, the DNC also gets, news stories written during the campaign about the surveillance program. In September of 2016, there's a story about possible counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign. In October of 2016, there's a story about the FBI investigating the Trump campaign, and we know on that last one that that Steele himself was involved. Is that correct? In October
That's correct,
of
and the
2016?
FBI actually ultimately knew that he was involved in the September one as well, that you're referencing, I believe.
And yet, what action did the FBI take when they knew these two facts?
Well, in November, they closed him, but then met with.
What did the Crossfire hurricane teams take? What steps did they take when they knew this about Steele, is what I should ask.
I'm sorry. Well, what happened is they closed him as a source in November, but that's when the meetings with Mr. Orr started, where he was the
Right.
conduit between them.
Right, so he's still able, the FBI still, it takes the information just via a DOJ conduit, which is its own separate, unbelievable problem. But yet still, they're taking all this information on board from Steele, even after they know that he's totally incredible. To me, this is the untold story of the 2016 campaign. And I don't know who at the DNC hatched this, but I suppose they ought to, maybe it's take a victory lap, but certainly they should be remembered for it. To get the FBI to pursue surveillance of a rival presidential campaign and then into the newly elected president's term, I think is just extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary. So let me ask you this. Are these individuals whose misdeeds that you have documented here in this report, the members, I'm thinking of the case agents, other members on the Crossfire Hurricane team, are they still, to your knowledge, working at the FBI?
To my understanding, some are, some aren't.
And why are those who are, why are they still there? What's your
I
understanding?
think you'd have to ask Director Wray.
And indeed, I think we should. What about the case agent who directly misled the DOJ intelligence attorney, Office of Intelligence Attorney, about Carter Page's relationship with other intelligence agencies in our government, who directly misled the OI about that? Is that person, to your knowledge, still at the FBI?
To my knowledge, that person is still there.
And is still actively working, maybe is still acting as a case
That I
agent,
think
to your
you'd
knowledge?
have to ask.
What about procedures at the FBI? To your knowledge, what procedures have been changed at the FBI to date to prevent something like this from happening?
I think all that I'm aware of is what's in Director Wray's letter that's attached here. But certainly there are far more reforms and changes that are needed to address all of our recommendations. That's a good beginning, but there's a lot more to be done.
I will just say in closing, Mr. Chairman, that I think it is an extraordinary thing when the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country, maybe the world, is able to effectively intervene and influence a presidential election at the behest and with the cooperation of another political party. I mean, I've been saying for a long time that, there's no collusion in the 2016 campaign. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the collusion was between the DNC and the FBI, and it is, if we don't change something here, I mean, to see FBI Director Wray go out and say in the face of all of this that he doesn't think that this vindicates the FBI and he doesn't think there are any problems, I, for one, don't know how any American can have confidence in that institution and in the integrity of our elections if things like this can happen. So thank you, Mr. Horowitz, for the work you've done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
Thank you for being here, Mr.
Oh my God, Don Dick. Oh, no. Durbin was bad enough. Klobuchar was bad enough. But Da Nang Dick, this is going to be brutal, folks. I'm probably going to have to interrupt fairly often just to keep my brain from exploding by all the stupid, disingenuous mendacity that comes out of this asshole's mouth. Because I don't think I could take more than 40 seconds of it at a time. Just so you know. Set the speed to 11. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I wish he wasn't on this committee, but buckle up. Here we go.
Mr. Horowitz, and again, thank you to you and your
Oh,
team
they finally
for
figured
your
out the
work.
camera age sunset.
Do you agree that the FBI meddled in the 2016 election?
Oh my God.
What I found is what's in this report. I'm not going
Did you
beyond
find
what
any evidence that the FBI purposefully intervened to affect the outcome of the 2016 election?
We've written about what they did here and in last year's report, and I'll stand on those findings and those findings alone.
I didn't find any conclusion that
Nobody
the
gives a
FBI
damn what you
meddled
find,
or
Blumenthal.
interfered in the election to affect the outcome.
We did not reach that conclusion.
You didn't reach a conclusion about the FBI intervening in the election or acting out of political bias, correct?
I would say, I'm going to stick by this report and last year's mid-year election report on what it did, because there are specific findings as to specific individuals.
Let me ask you about some of those findings, but let me just say at the very outset,
In your face, Dick.
I know you're a career official, and I want to pay tribute to all of the law enforcement officials, particularly in the FBI, because I can see how some of what's been said about them might be severely and unfairly demoralizing. We have your back.
Oh my God.
We have your back when you're out there enforcing the law.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh my God. Klobuchar is sitting there right now going, oh, I wish I'd said that. Oh God, it would have put me up another point in the campaign. Oh, Blumenthal, you stole my thunder. Well, Blumenthal steals a lot of stuff, Amy. Steals thunder, steals the limelight, steals valor. He's a bit of a thief.
With weapons pointed at you, and sometimes they are firearms, and sometimes they are political weapons.
You mean like Adam Schiff grabbing 3,500 pages of phone records just so he can smear his ranking chair in the Intelligence Committee, along with a reporter, John Solomon, Rudy Giuliani. Oh gosh, the lawyer, the president's lawyer at the White House. Suddenly his name escapes me. That's wrong. I should not be forgetting that. But you mean that kind of pointing there, Dick?
We should have your back. So some of what's been said here, but also in the larger
No, JF,
realm
the
of public comment,
White House
I
lawyer.
think has been severely a disservice to our law enforcement and to the United States, because we are discouraging able and dedicated young people from joining your ranks.
Oh my God. Somebody had a disagreement with an IG, and suddenly it has tainted the entire IG community to the point where no one will ever want to be one again. You know what? The way millennials are right now, I wouldn't actually argue that point against Blumenthal. I'd say he's right, because these people are such special snowflakes. If they had any inkling of the fact that someone could disagree with them, they wouldn't do it. This is such pandering. Get to the point. I mean, Barr can take it. Durham can take it. They're career prosecutors. They've had the best defense lawyers around go after them in court. They know how to handle themselves. And Horowitz was a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, same. I think he has a thick enough skin to be able to handle a couple guys saying, we think you're wrong because we know more about this than you do, because we have the statutory ability to look into more than you do. But there's Blumenthal. Oh, you're a victim. That typical Democrat bullshit. Everybody's a victim.
And we need them. And I say that as a former United States attorney and a state attorney general who has worked with some of the best
And someone who lied about
some
being in
of the
Vietnam.
less best. So let me ask you a few questions about those findings. President Trump has said repeatedly that the FBI, quote, tried to overthrow the presidency.
There's no way that Horowitz can answer that question. And you know that.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried to overthrow the presidency?
No, what we found is, again, laid out here in this report.
Well, is there any evidence that you found that the FBI tried to overthrow the presidency?
No, we found the issues
The
we
answer is
identified
no,
here. That's
correct?
what we found.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried to entrap anyone?
Yes. Yes, during the defensive briefing. During Papadopoulos' conversation with Downer. During Flynn's, Flynn's conversation in the intelligence briefing. With Flynn being interviewed by the FBI in a complete ambush after being illegally unmasked and wiretapped. Yeah. But Horowitz didn't find any of that except the defensive briefing. So he can't answer those things, but you're going to pretend they never happened because you're a piece of shit.
As a legal matter, since we don't see any actual cases come out of this, I think the answer is no.
There was no entrapment, correct?
Yeah,
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tapped the phones at Trump Tower?
no. The only wiretapping or the only surveillance we found was what's laid out here.
Did you find any evidence?
And through Carter Page, the FBI was able to listen in on any phone call he had with anybody, and that was directly done so they could catch him in a conversation with people from the Trump campaign. If not candidate, then President Trump himself. So fuck you.
Evidence that the FBI planted informants in the Trump campaign?
No.
Trump never said they did that.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried specifically to entrap any of the individuals who were the focus of their investigation, namely Manafort, Flynn, Papadopoulos, or Page?
Entrapment's a legal term when you're moving forward on a criminal case. We didn't see that in this case.
Correct. There's no evidence here of entrapment.
Dude, he just said you're misusing the word. It's a term of art. It's not what he was looking into. Their entrapment has to do with a criminal case. They were trying to set up Flynn and Trump in the intelligence briefing.
But the president has claimed that there was entrapment, that his phones were tapped, that Carter Page may have been used as a spy.
He was used as a pass-through to spy.
Did you find evidence that the FBI put spies in the Trump campaign?
You just asked that.
I'm going to speak to the terminology used at the department that we oversee, which is confidential human sources. And we did not find evidence that the FBI sought to place confidential human sources inside the campaign or plant them inside the campaign.
But there
Would
were
you
CHSs
agree
in the campaign.
with
one of
the
them reported
contention
on it.
that the Russia investigation, including the Mueller investigation, was a quote-unquote bogus narrative?
Did Mueller find anything after 2 years? Did he? No. Even though people like you and Adam Schiff and MSNBC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, every week, if not every other day, came out with a new bombshell that Trump was going to be impeached, that the walls were closing in, that it was a tipping point, that he's panicking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that's not a false narrative, I don't know what the fuck one is.
We don't address the Russia investigation or take issue with its handling at all in this report.
Well, in fact,
Not
you
in
found
fact.
or agreed with Mueller that the Russian government attacked our democracy in a sweeping and systematic way, correct?
We add a couple pages in here as background to reference not only the Mueller report, but other reports as well, including congressional reports on that issue.
Did you show this report to Attorney General Barr before it was released?
Yeah, as standard process, we provide this to the Attorney General and to the FBI Director.
Did he suggest any changes?
He didn't suggest any changes, and, you know, we
He
got
didn't
some...
suggest any corrections?
Well, he found a few typos and other things that he suggested we might want to think about.
So you must have been surprised by his attack on you and
Attack. Oh my God. These people are such drama queens, I swear to God.
your team.
No, I had some idea he wasn't completely supportive of that.
Do you think he was fair?
He's the Attorney General of the United States. I've had cases situations where there have been disagreements between myself and leadership of the components, and
Well, I want to
he's free
give you a
do that.
chance to defend
Oh my God.
yourself.
He has the report. Why does he have to defend himself?
And your team, who have done a highly professional job here, 19 months, hundreds of witnesses, hard work. Do you think this attack on
Wasn't hundreds of witnesses, it was 100 witnesses.
you and your team is fair?
I'll say this. My defense of our team and our work is we stand by the report. Nothing I've heard changes our view. The department, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the FBI Director, whomever, is free to disagree with my conclusions. I didn't take the IG job to be popular and to not have my feelings hurt. I
By the
wouldn't be
way,
the IG if that was the case.
But Richard Blumenthal just said, Mr. Horowitz, he just said that by being criticized by outside entities, that young people will never want to be IGs because they'll know that their conclusions won't be universally accepted, that their dicks won't be sucked. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should not have said that. I apologize. That was beyond the pale. I apologize. That was not necessary. Ladies, I'm sorry. Gentlemen, I'm sorry. I should not have said that. You get my point.
I assume you would not agree with the characterization that the agents involved in this work on the investigation of the Russian attack on our democracy were quote-unquote scum, would you?
I would not call people names like that.
Yeah. Look what they did to Paul Manafort. Pre-dawn raid, guns drawn, ripped him out of bed. Look what they did to Roger Stone. Pre-dawn raid, guns drawn. Speedboats, tactical boats in the canal behind his house. In case how old is Stone again? Something like 67, 72, somewhere in there. In case someone of that age ran for the canal and tried to swim for it, leaving his deaf wife behind with no clue as to what was going on. George Papadopoulos being taken off a flight from Germany to Dulles, put in shackles and handcuffs, taken into a room, lied to, which I know that the federal law enforcement is allowed to lie to a suspect. And when they were leading him away without any contact with his lawyers, which they would have been able to do if they'd let him finish his trip to Chicago, where he's from, and could have turned himself in, just like Manafort, just like Stone. Instead, they throw him in jail overnight and then drag him in front of a judge the next day and threaten him with a spy charge. Yeah, but they're not scum at all. What did they do to Manafort again? They put him in solitary confinement because of a couple of hang-up and 2-second calls to people on the outside, people he never got through to, or if he did, he got one word out, and he was put in solitary for that because he was tampering with witnesses. And then they talked about putting him in Rikers. 25-year-old gangbangers die in Rikers. How do you think a 73-year-old man is going to fare in that jail? I don't know his exact age, just somewhere around there. But no, they're not scum. No. They are the wonderful people of the world. This is why I get ticked when people say that 99.9% of the rank and file of the FBI are good people. If they were, none of that would have happened. According to Papadopoulos, one of the FBI agents who arrested him, as they were leading him off, Papadopoulos was like, "What the fuck's going on?" And the guy said, again, this is Papadopoulos saying this, I don't have any corroboration. But according to Papadopoulos, the guy said, "This is what you get when you work for Trump."
I welcome my colleagues'
You got to address
newfound indignation about the potential reform of the FISA court and the process.
The indignation is about people lying through their teeth in order to rip away the First and Fourth Amendment rights of a U.S. citizen with, as far as people who know what's going on concerned, zero lawful predicate.
And you well know, I'm sure, that reforms have been suggested. In fact, I authored the FISA Court Reform Act in 2013.
I'm sure it was beautifully
with
written.
18 co-sponsors, all Democrats. That
okay.
legislation would have created
Great bipartisan
a
report,
special
Dick.
advocate. It would have created other checks because the FISA process is secret, because ordinarily we don't want our adversaries to know we're investigating them.
Oh yeah,
correct?
ordinarily.
But there still needs to be checks and balances, scrutiny, to make sure that accurate information is presented to the FISA judges.
There's no way you can prevent people from lying. You can only hold them accountable for it. How many layers did we count yesterday, or was it Monday? How many layers did we count between the case agent or the line agent, whichever, who provided the reasons, the charges, if you will, for why the FISA should be, the FISA warrant should go through? I mean, from there up to the final look at by the DOJ lawyers before it went to the last two upper people for signatures. I believe it was 6 layers. And there was no way for any of those 6 layers to independently verify what the asshole at the case agent level told them unless they took the time to do it. There was nothing in the rules that said they had to. And the people handling the Woods procedures, the Woods files, were under the impression that they didn't have to corroborate anything, that all they had to do was show that what was said in the warrant application was backed up by the source in the Woods file. So if the FISA application said Richard Steele said, Christopher Steele, sorry, I do that all the time. Christopher Steele said, Carter Page is a piece of shit. Then all the guy with the Woods file did was say, yeah, I can show that Christopher Steele said that. No corroborating evidence whatsoever, even though that's what the Woods files were for. They actually ripped the real heart of the Woods files, the Wood procedure, off the top and pretended they didn't have to do any of that, when it was designed specifically to keep them honest. Because Robert Mueller, when he was FBI director, was told by the FISA court that there were 75 instances of FBI agents either lying to the court specifically to get a warrant or taking the warrant information and leaking it to prosecutors and cops. So don't talk to me about more checks and balances. Just write the rules the way, or run the rules the way they should be run. And fix some of the damn procedures that allow people to do all kinds of nasty shit without ever having to go to the DOJ to get approval. That's what needs to be done. You should know all about lying.
Who work in secret.
What the hell? No. First ad.
After
I'm
about
actually kind of surprised.
15%
Hey, Ray.
of the way through,
Woo-hoo.
it made me want to heave.
Ray's in the house.
After about 25% of the way through, I thought I dropped acid.
We all know
It's
who this
surreal.
is. I love this guy. I thought I dropped
I mean, I
acid.
just couldn't believe
Oh
it.
my God.
I've read it multiple times, and every time I read it,
Let me
it
ask you this.
surprises me.
How many members
Oh, come on, put the camera on him.
comprised the Misfire Hurricane team?
There were 3 teams over that period of time. I would venture to guess, again, depending upon how you count them,
Just roughly.
That's what I thought he said, SRS 4859. That's what I thought he said. I'm sitting there thinking, nah. I can't imagine Kennedy saying he dropped acid. But then again, knowing Kennedy, yeah, I can believe it. What a great guy. Put the camera on him, damn it. He's worth it.
at least half a dozen to a dozen on each of those iterations. I'll turn around and see if I'm somewhat close.
Does that include their supervisors?
Generally
All of them?
speaking.
Half dozen to a dozen?
And probably a little bit more if you're going to go all the way
Okay.
up the chain through all the different levels at the Bureau.
Do you or your team have a feel for how many of these folks are still at the FBI? I know you tried to answer that. Does anybody know that?
Well, the higher level people, as you know, have changed over. In
Changed
the last
over?
year. So the director, deputy director, or the assistant director, deputy assistant director, a lot of people at the upper levels are no longer.
But are some
with
of
the
the
Bureau.
actual agents,
Some of the agents are still there. Some
are
of the
they still
first-line
working on
supervisors.
FISA applications?
I would encourage you to speak to the FBI about that.
Yeah, well, I think we
they
will.
have,
Yeah, I think we will.
I think they've taken some steps in that regard, I
It's
understand.
it's easier to divorce your spouse around here than it is to get fired. That's clear, at least at the FBI. Is Mr. Orr still at the Department of Justice?
Oh, you're
Yeah,
right,
my understanding
Skullcram.
is he is.
You're absolutely
He's
right.
still there?
That's my understanding.
How long within the FBI, I know you just issued your report, but how long within the FBI has this been knowledge?
So we sent
Good
the
question.
draft for classification.
Not
end of
your
August,
document,
September.
excuse me
Oh,
for
I'm sorry.
interrupting, but just the fact that there was a major league screw-up here.
It evolved over time. They did not know a lot of this until we found it.
But they
So,
know
for
it now,
example, the
right?
altered email, they
Chris
didn't know
Ray
that.
knows it now, though, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
That's what I was saying, as of the end of August.
And see, again, that's the problem. This was a headquarters special. a name that really doesn't exist in the FBI, but that's just what they've been calling it, and a SIM, a sensitive investigative matter. So by putting it underneath McCabe and Strzok and Page and their little band of cronies, Priestap and Baker, and the like, they were able to hide the illegality of what they were doing this entire time. And again, imagine it took Trump and Barr to get this going. So how much about this would we know if Hillary had been elected? Zero. Christopher Wray, sitting there in his ivory tower at the FBI, had no idea what his predecessors had done to Carter Page, according to Horowitz. Either Christopher Wray doesn't know how to ask any questions, he's a complete moron, or he doesn't give a damn, he just wants the FBI to continue as is.
All right. Does your report vindicate Mr. Comey?
It doesn't vindicate anyone at the FBI who touched this, including the leadership.
Does it vindicate Mr. McCabe?
Same answer.
How about Ms. Page?
A little different there because, as we found here, she wasn't involved in this, so I actually don't, largely wasn't involved in this, so.
She participated in the
In some
discussion.
discussions, but was not in the FISA chain, which is,
On that note,
Good question, King James.
who briefed the agent that was sent to surveil Michael Flynn during the meeting with President Trump?
that was discussed up and down the chain at the FBI.
Okay.
So that was not a hidden fact or hidden information.
All right.
Wow. Wow.
I like the fact that you and your team are very precise in your language. Frankly, I wish I wrote as well as you and your team do. And I noticed you were careful to say, I'm going to quote here, "We did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the decisions to open the 4 individual investigations." Your words.
Correct.
No documentary evidence and no testimonial evidence. So you didn't find any documents that said, we did this to get Trump, right?
Or text messages
Right.
like the struck page
Right.
text messages.
And nobody who was involved in this circus without a tent looked you in the eye and said, yep, I did it to get Trump. Nobody did that.
Or, for example, a whistleblower come in or other people
Right.
tell us
But
they
none
heard
of the
something like
agents you
that.
talked to looked you in the eye and said, yeah, you're right, I did it to get Trump.
And nobody came in through a different means and said, I've got a problem here with this, what's going on.
I mean, you don't have to qualify as Mensa material to know not to do that to the Inspector General, right?
Yes, although, look at some of the text messages we found. So I'm not sure.
I understand.
That may be a counter narrative to that.
Well, I don't want to get too, I don't know what's the word, epistemological here, but is the absence of evidence always the evidence of absence?
No, it isn't.
So can you rule out categorically, unequivocally, and unconditionally that there was no bias here by the fact that you didn't find anything in writing and none of these chuckleheads looked you in the eye and said, yeah, I did it to get Trump?
Well, yeah, it's rare that I could tell you at any point in time, I could unequivocally 100% say this actually happened. So I get it. I will say that somewhat the difference on the opening is we concluded, based on the evidence, that Mr. Priestap opened it. We have not seen in last year's investigation or this investigation, looking through texts, emails, et cetera, talking to other people, any evidence that he did it for a improper purpose. Can I tell you 1,000% someone won't walk in a week and say, aha, you missed this? But that's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's talk about the people involved in the initial FISA application and the renewals. These are experienced people, right?
In this case, these were experienced people.
Many of them had professional degrees, include but not limited to law degrees, right?
I actually don't know what all their degrees were.
Okay. They knew the law.
They should have not only known the law, they should have known every single policy that they had to deal with
I
here.
mean, they were handpicked by Mr. McCabe, right?
They were handpicked.
Okay. This wasn't their first rodeo.
It certainly wasn't, with maybe an exception or two towards the end, of relatively new agents coming on board.
Well.
But that, to me, should not have been an excuse, just to be clear.
Well, it just seems to me that it has to be one or two things. Either incompetence or intentional conduct.
I agree. It's either sheer incompetence, intentionality, or something perhaps in between.
So which
Rosnet-
do you think it is?
We've got so many different people here. First of all, it wouldn't be fair to lump everybody into one, because there are different actors coming in at different times. Some people have more touches of this than others. I think it's fair for people to sit there and look at all of these 17 events and wonder how it could be purely incompetence. Okay?
Well, I want to thank you again. I know this puts you in a tough spot. And I hope you'll tell your colleagues back at the FBI that we appreciate their work,
Absolutely.
but it's got to be fixed.
Yeah.
Senator
Somebody's
Black,
got, at a minimum, somebody's got to be fired.
Agree completely. There's got to be a change in the culture also.
I'm done.
agreed. Thank
I'm
you.
done, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General, I know you're happy to see the end of the dais coming at you. You're going to get out of here. Let me pick up right where Senator Kennedy left off, because I will tell you the perception by the American people from reading your report, and we've all put up links so that people can read it, is that this was intentional, that it was deliberate, that it was malicious, it was premeditated and well thought out, and that it is conducted by people who were desperate. In essence, it is the epitome of the swamp. It is murky and muddy, and people weren't going to get their way, and this guy who was going to win and then did win didn't deserve to win.
But there is no deep state. There is no swamp. The Democrats just said so a little while ago. Even though I thought a month ago, or 2 months ago, I should say, when the whistleblower came out, I'm sorry, the fake whistleblower came out, that that we were told that there is a deep state, but they're out there protecting the American people and the Constitution from the fascist dictator that is Orange Man Bad. So who's right about this? I guess maybe the people who can't keep their story straight are lying? Maybe?
And it does have the appearance of intentionality, because you would not have this series of unfortunate coincidences. That is not what it is. It is the surveillance state at work. This is what they did. And they took their professional place and those tools that they had at their disposal to go spy on a campaign and on U.S. citizens, which is unbelievable. And you've heard it from several today that people can't believe this happened. And you can say, yes, there are sins of omission here, but there are also sins of commission. And they were deliberate and intentional and very malicious in the way they went about this. I want to talk a little bit about Christopher Steele. I was looking in Appendix A, I think it's page 419, and it says in there he was paid $95,000 over a 3-year period of time, I believe.
Correct.
Okay, and what was that money paid to him for?
So that would have been for various pieces of information that he gave to the
Okay, so
FBI after
that's-
being a CHS in 2013.
All right?
But not related to be clear, not related to Crossfire Hurricane,
Correct.
between
But-
13 and 16,
Right,
2013.
he was
16.
considered a trusted source, and thereby he was paid.
Correct.
Okay, and then he began working with Fusion GPS in June of 2016. And that really should have raised some alarm bells with you all. November comes along of that year, and you dropped Steele as a source,
Well,
correct?
the FBI dropped Steele.
Yes, the FBI drops him. He wasn't trusted anymore, and that was because he blew his cover.
Correct.
Started talking to the media. And
He had already
they
been
should
talking
have
to the
stopped
media.
relying on him at that point, correct?
Under FBI rules, once you're closed, you're closed. You need certain approvals to start reinitiating and reengaging.
That's right. But the FBI kept using him, correct?
They met with him through Bruce Orr.
Yes. And they used him for information after he was cut off,
They received that information.
right, 13 different times.
Correct.
Correct, okay. So then we get this dossier. It is used as a big part of setting up this entire process for the FISA application. And Christopher Steele, people at the FBI know Christopher Steele was untrustworthy. He was an untrustworthy foreign actor. He was a political hack. He didn't like Trump. He was being paid by the Clintons, but they still pushed forward with using him and exercised extremely poor judgment, correct?
Certainly, once they found out that he had done, they had decided to close him, they should have followed the rules if they wanted to reengage with him, but they had plenty of information to question the validity and the bona fides of some of the reporting.
Should Bruce Orr be held criminally responsible for his conduct?
You know, we make a recommendation to the department
And that's for
to
others
review.
to make.
Others will make the
Yes.
decision.
Let me ask you, a couple of times we've heard about lower level FBI agents and lawyers who had generated some of these inaccuracies, these 17 inaccuracies. So what is the process for supervisors fact-checking?
So under the Woods procedures, these factual accuracy procedures put in place in response to prior instances found of the failure to accurately relay information to the court, the first-line supervisor is supposed to go through and recheck the process to
But
make
that
sure
did
it was
not
done.
happen
That
here.
did not happen here,
And
on
why
multiple
did that-
occasions.
Right. And why did that not happen on these multiple occasions that this work was not checked?
Because we were given explanations ranging from a lack of understanding of the process to,
So they were trying to skirt not only the rules, but the law,
we got a lot of explanations that we didn't find particularly
that
satisfactory.
they were skirting the law. I think what they did to Carter Page, as you have heard, is just unbelievable. Let me ask you this, how often do you find mistakes in a FISA application?
Well, this is actually the first time my office has done a deep dive into a particular application. We've done higher level reviews on the FISA process and have found various issues at a higher level, but this is the first time we've actually been able to delve in this way to a
It's
FISA.
a fairly unusual occurrence.
Yep, but there was no
Okay.
I would
bias.
put this- I would hope so.
If it's not an unusual occurrence, there are more cultural problems than you know about at the FBI, correct?
That's correct.
I would say so, too. Okay. I want to touch on accountability in the short amount of time that I have left, because I think it is absolutely just infuriating to the American people that those who executed this exercise, which should have been called Operation Takedown Trump, because that's what they were doing. That they are still getting a taxpayer-funded paycheck, they're still getting taxpayer-funded benefits and vacation time. When they take off for Christmas, they're going to be on the taxpayer dime. And you know, around here, from time to time, you'll hear people talk about those that went after the late Senator Stevens. One of them still working for the U.S. Attorney's Office up in Anchorage. Another one is working in Spokane. Senator Stevens was found to be innocent, and they're still getting a government paycheck. So we want to make certain that disciplinary action is taken. I know you were asked about case agent number 1. He is still there. What about SSA 1, who did the security briefing? Still employed?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so he is still using our money to fund his lifestyle. And the lawyer, we know, is going to have face criminal referrals, correct?
I'm just going to stick with what we say in here, which is we
Okay.
referred it to the Attorney General and the FBI Director.
Okay. The FBI sent a supervisory, no, I don't want to ask you that. We know, I think we know the answer to that. Peter Strzok approved the request to expedite the first FISA application, and he, along with Lisa Page, pushed for the expedition of the first application with DOJ officials, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we know that she was, in answer to what Senator Kennedy asked you, she was involved in the line of communication and the setup of this, correct?
She was involved in at least the one meeting that we identify in the report.
Okay. And I found it curious in your report, and this is the reason I ask it. You said that they had no role in the preparation of the approval of any of the 4 FISA warrant applications. So I guess if you're saying not putting pen to paper and giving a nod or an up or down.
They were not in the, there's a
Okay.
substantial chain of approval that has to go on at the FBI. They were not in the chain that had to sign off on it, but they did get involved, as you indicated, in pushing the department to get answers to,
So they were
can we move
involved in the
forward?
process, but just not
In that
the
way.
final approval.
They did not have responsibility at any step of this for
Okay,
signing.
we're going to get you out of here maybe a few seconds early. I just want to thank you and your team very much for the patience, for being here, for the report that you've given. I think that many of us look forward to what General Durham is going to say when he takes up some of this. But I think it's important to note also, this is not the first time something has happened like this in one of our federal agencies. And the reaction when I'm at home in Tennessee from people is they cannot believe the absolute maliciousness that took place with this. It is not unfortunate coincidences. It is the surveillance state. Yield back.
And if I could just thank you also, you mentioned Senator Stevens and the bill that Senator Lee has pending that you co-sponsored and joined. I appreciate your support for our work.
We're truly near the end. Senator Hirano has one question.
One question. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Horowitz,
Yeah.
you are investigating for 19 months, 100 witnesses, 1 million documents. You even have a hotline for whistleblowers.
Right.
So did any whistleblowers come forward during your investigation with any concern that errors were made intentionally or out of bias against Trump? I mean, for example, I'm looking at the footnote on page 339 of your report, and, you know, it cites some of the very colorful pro-Trump tweets that were made by some of the FBI agents. One would think that if they knew anything, they would have contacted you in the 19-month investigation that you conducted. Did anybody come forward?
We did not have any such evidence.
So no documents, no testimony, no one coming forward to complain. That would be another way of gauging motives, as you put it, correct?
Correct.
No one came forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I probably
that-
violated the Geneva Convention
that
today.
sums it up,
I
then.
mean, you sat there 4 hours.
No
and
one
I gave
came
you a
forward,
bathroom
so
break.
nothing went
I
wrong.
really
Thanks, Maisie.
appreciate what all of you did. This is a well-documented report. There's sort of a blue team, red team view to some extent, but I'm sort of glad to see all of us coming together that this should never happen again. The FISA system to survive has to be reformed. To the FISA court, we're looking to you to take corrective action. If you take corrective action, that will give us some confidence that you should stick around. If you don't, it's going to be hurtful to the future of the court. I think all of us are now thinking differently about checks and balances in that regard. The country would be stronger. Let me just end with where I began. Rather than debating whether or not there was a legal predicate, reasonable articulation, which is a very low standard, to open up a preliminary investigation. Durham will have his view of what really happened. He may know more than you. I don't know. I trust him to be fair. I trust you to be fair. The fact that 3 lawyers disagree is okay. No one's ever suggested y'all did a bad job. You've done a great job. You can reach your conclusion about the legal predicate, and you have, and I respect it. And I'm going to assume for a moment that's the right conclusion. That doesn't matter at all to me, because after it was opened, it became a nightmare. It became something that can never happen again. It became, over time, a criminal conspiracy to defraud the court. It became an effort by lawyers to doctor evidence. It became a conscious effort to deny the court exculpatory information about an American citizen. They should have stopped, at least in January 2017, when the Russian subsource said, everything in the dossier I disavow. Poor Carter Page. 2 more warrant renewals after they were on notice the dossier was unreliable.
3.
All I can say is that why they did it, you can make your own decision. But it's pretty clear to me that this was a lot of things, but it was not a counterintelligence investigation to protect Donald Trump. This was opened as a counterintelligence investigation, and it kept going and going and going after it should have stopped, because the last thing on their mind was to protect Donald Trump. A lot of the key players here were upset with the outcome of the 2016 election, and man, they had a lot of power. And that's what worries me the most. You may not like what the American people do, but you should honor their decision. And the reason the investigation survived and kept going after so many stop signs is because people wanted it to keep going. The reason nobody briefed Donald Trump about you may have people working for you connected to Russia is they could give a damn about protecting him. This is just my view. It's kind of odd that in a counterintelligence investigation, you never briefed the person who's the subject of the foreign influence, like you did Dianne Feinstein and like they did Hillary Clinton.
Thank you.
So the bottom line
Thank
here
you for bringing
is,
up Feinstein.
I hope we never have a defensive briefing or intelligence briefing where you send an FBI agent to do a 302 on the people you're briefing. This is some really scary stuff. I think I know what their motivation was, but it doesn't matter. They did it. Hope somebody holds them accountable. And I hope it never, ever happens again. To my Democratic friends, this could happen to you one day. Mr. Horowitz, do you agree that every politician in America should be concerned about what happened here?
I'll go further. Every American should want to make sure this FISA process works the right way.
Finally, to those of us in politics, how easy it is for somebody to come in our lives and our campaigns as volunteers. And I would hope the FBI would tell me if they've got a reasonable suspicion that somebody in my campaign is a bad actor, so I can do something about it. What scares me the most is that the power to open up a counterintelligence investigation is almost unlimited. The power to abuse it is exactly what your report tells us about. Thank you. The hearing's adjourned. And finally, this is the beginning, not the end, of this committee's involvement in this matter. Much more to follow. Thank you.
All right. We did it, folks. We did it. So, let me see who. I think it was King James, or was it just mentioned that the hearing had been adjourned. Oh, SRS 4859. That was at quarter after. I can't imagine it's possible that we're only 3 minutes removed from the end of it. I think I would have held you guys a lot longer than that. Anyway, good job, guys. I mean, really, good job. This was one of the better chats I think we've ever had. A lot of the good folks here, as always, and new people. Blue Peahen. I don't know if you're still here, but sorry, Blue Peahen. I don't know if I didn't see you recently, but if you're still here, great. Stevie Bananas, again, wonderful to have you. I especially will always remember your chat about your association with Chief Justice Roberts. That is burned into my brain. But everybody, take a bow. This was our first live hearing, and I think it went. I personally, y'all can disagree with me. In fact, I hope you will, if I'm wrong, that I thought this went really well. We kept up, and life is good. I apologize for not getting the actual beginning of the afternoon session. Again, I missed probably about 20 seconds because they started before I thought they were going to. The camera was not where it was supposed to be. As we've seen all day, the camera was actually pointing at the back of the bench, looking over the gallery. And so I was looking at all the seats in the gallery that weren't full yet, thinking, okay, this is gonna fill up and then we'll start. And the next thing I know, Graham's banging the gavel and calling it underway, and the first senator, bam, started like that. So it took me a little while to catch up. But you didn't miss much. I mean, the question, you were able to get the context of it pretty easily, and what I was able to pick up. So I think that was a good hearing. We called it. We knew exactly what the Democrats were going to do, and they did not disappoint. They are so easily predicted. It's amazing. They have a playbook that is all about. Again, I say it over and over again, but I think it's completely accurate. Whitewashing, rehabilitating, and backfilling. I know I mix up the order on time to time, but still, that's what they do. And they did that every person, at least two of the three. There was some gaslighting that was nice to see. They added a twist to it. But none of you had any problem seeing right through it. So again, great job, everyone. Now, so what are we doing next? Tomorrow, starting at 11 a.m., we're going to go back to the report. I hope you all aren't thinking that this will be a diminution of wanting to see it just because we saw the hearing today. There's still 6 chapters to go through the report, plus 2 appendices. And there's a lot there that we didn't hear today that we're going to need to see. And the things that we did hear today, we're going to need to go over in more detail as the report will provide. So Chapter 3, we start tomorrow, 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 p.m. real time. I did not look ahead to, you know what, that window got closed accidentally, so I don't have the report up right now. I will do my level best to at least get through Chapter 3 tomorrow. If it's a little shorter, maybe we can get into part of Chapter 4. We'll see. Of course, this report is single-spaced, very dense, and very infuriating. So between the slowness of the read and the interruptions caused by the absolute insane amounts of illegality that were performed by the FBI, and part of the DOJ in this process, it won't be a fast read. I'm planning on continuing the read all the way through next week until we're done. Obviously, we will not finish Friday. But I hope you all will be able to stick with it, at least as often as you can. You guys really, really make this channel worthwhile. And your additions to the proceedings are absolutely value added to this whole thing. Massively value added. I'll just cruise the chat real quickly, see if there's anything I missed. Let's see. Uncle Bobby. I don't even want to read that out loud because it's such a disgusting thought. I mean, it's not a disgusting post. It's just the mental image that it pastes is, I can't say that out loud. I think it would hurt everyone. David. Oh, dude. I'm so sorry you just got here. Well, I recorded it. You know, you'll be able to watch every minute of it. So you didn't miss anything. Remember, the chat replays too when you watch the video after it posts. So you obviously won't be able to interact with it, but you'll see all of the hilarity that ensued. Uncle Bobby made me laugh so hard once I had to mute my mic. So there's that. SRS 4859, you're extraordinarily welcome. And again, thank you. It was a lot of fun today. It really was. I hope my rants didn't get too heated. I know my blood starts to boil with the Dems sometimes, but yeah, like I said, David, yeah, it does suck not being able to not to interact with it. I wish there was a way I could create that. I'd probably make $1 billion if I could create a way that you could retroactively interact with a chat. That'd be bending time. But yeah, $1 billion is $1 billion. We'll have to see what. Oh, Taco Bell, dude, you can't eat that unless you're drunk. You can't eat Taco Bell unless you're drunk. That's all there is to it. You got to watch that. Imodium, or Pepto-Bismol for the stomach, but Imodium for the back end, definitely. Just go to the drugstore, go to the pharmacy window, and say Imodium, and they'll point you to it, and they'll point you to it very quickly. Thank you, Ray. I appreciate it. It's always wonderful to have you here, of course. So, folks, I'll shut up. Tomorrow morning, again, noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central, we'll start Chapter 3 of the Horowitz FISA report, and we will have a lot of fun. And hey, my voice held all day. My back doesn't hurt. Life's good. Life's good. So until tomorrow morning, be well. God bless. Happy trails. See you soon. Bye-bye.
I hope I learned something. I hope I learned something. I hope I learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something. I hope you learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. something. I hope we learn something. I hope we learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny